Welcome to Ichiraku Ramen, and thank you for joining me for another journey into the world of shinobi. Before we begin, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who listens, supports the channel, and enjoys these stories. Today's story is the final part of Ink Heart. Forget the talk no jutsu. In this universe, Naruto Uzumaki trades the will of fire for the cold, relentless pursuit of science. There is no mob violence or torture from Konoha, just the quiet cruelty of isolation. Whispered about and entirely ignored by the Hidden Leaf Village, including the Third Hokage, Naruto doesn't seek their acknowledgement. Instead, he uses his brilliant, deceptive mind to willingly carve out his own dark path in the shadows. Don't expect any long-winded speeches about peace, friendship, or happiness. This Naruto is a ruthless visionary who doesn't care who must die to help him reach his ultimate goals, so long as they aren't family. To him, you're either an ally, an obstacle, or an experiment. This is a fan-made story inspired by the world of Naruto. All characters and the original universe belong to their respective creators. This narration is created for entertainment purposes as part of a transformative storytelling experience. The story itself was written by Foy the Snooze Button, and full credit goes to the original author. If you would like to read the original version, the link to the story is included in the video description below. If you like my content and want to keep up with future updates, hit that subscribe button. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. It not only helps me but helps with YouTube algorithm. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 7. Are you sure this is the right place? Naruto asked as he skeptically looked down at the snowy landscape sparsely populated by decrepit huts that operated as shops. He squinted his red eyes, hidden under his goggles, at the massive mountain that the market town was named after. He shared a skeptical look with his samurai friend, as they stood on another mountain which was much shorter than Mount Yomisaki. Aoki-chan turned the large map in her hands over and looked at the sun, hidden behind a few clouds, to confirm if they were really north. She looked down at her map again and nodded resolutely. I'm positive this is Yomisaki Market Town. About 2 hours ago, the duo had been on the run from an entire hidden village after they had taken a tour of their hidden underground library. Flashback. Naruto hopped backwards from a mallet and was forced to disperse into multiple spiders as he sensed a sword cutting through the air towards his spine. The spiders reassembled beside the female Ronin, who was expertly deflecting and countering sword strokes from the sea of humanity before them, all of whom were wearing Kumo forehead protectors. He grabbed her hand and she didn't strike because she was very much aware of what his hand felt like at that point, and she used that cue to stab her sword into the ground and yell, "Earth Pulse." The ground rippled under them violently and threw the thousands of ninjas raining surrounding them away, giving the duo a chance to run. Naruto, dragging the female by her hand towards the exit, ignored the accusing look his friend was sending him as they blurred to their destination. Rows and rows of shelves and books that reached high onto the roof blurred around them as they tried to navigate their way back to where they had come from. I knew this was a bad idea. She shouted over the pained groans and outraged screams. I freaking told you, Naruto. She could see the ninjas' wall running towards them on the shelves. Hundreds of them surging from behind them and a few coming from in front. Yell at me later, Aoki-chan. He grunted before a grin and a loud hoot left his mouth. But isn't this fun? For a fraction of a second her eyes turned red. No it isn't. Hey, remember, you'd ask me what I wanted for my birthday, he said with a lax roll of his eyes. I thought you were joking. Her screaming reduced fractionally before it went up again. But what sort of birthday present is finding out the secret of the Raikage's lightning armor? Naruto shot 2 senbon downwards and they clanged against the shiny tiles and impaled their intended target. I like being spontaneous, Aoki-chan. You know that, he said and looked over his shoulder with large doughy eyes. Even with subtly wobbling lips, don't you like my unpredictability? He idly sent 3 kicks to 3 cloud ninjas that dove at him from the ceiling. The Ronin blushed a little and looked away. Whatever, Naruto smiled and used his other hand to poke her reddening cheeks. Your birthday is in a few months. I swear on my name and my summoning scroll that you can do anything you want that day. Deal? She looked at him sharply, then away again, allowing him to drag her through the obnoxiously large room. Shelves of books spread out far and wide with which they were running through. Deal, she muttered back. The secret Kumogakure underground library was located at the epicenter of the village, under the Raikage's tower and dangerously deep under the ground, with about 27 separate rooms and 5 levels going downwards, each one with records of Kumo, as well as the world's history and accomplishments, as well as secret techniques. Only Chunin and higher were able to know about it, but Anbu and the Raikage were the only ones allowed access, plus the few Chunin that maintained the library. The sort of defenses placed on and inside the underground library could be split into 3 types: sensors, alarms and locks. All of them were at least level 7. Up to 5 different locks on the entrance door located under the cage's desk. Each one had to open at the very same time or the alarms would go off. This led to stairs winding downwards 2 flights with sensory detection seal combinations peppering the walls that detected if the person walking down the stairs was authorized. If not, the alarms would sound. The stairs landed in the first room, an empty space with white paint that had a larger-than-life locking seal at the very end of the room, which had a special name tag seal that had to be swiped over it. Otherwise, the person breaking in would be struck with lighting chakra that would freeze them in place until ninjas came to violently apprehend him or her. From there, it was simply using the same methods getting that far to traipse from room to room, level to level, and touring around the super-secret library. This was possibly the strongest and most secure location in the entire country, and it was suicide to break into it. Once a team of rogue sand ninjas attempted to break in, after interrogating one of the Chunin in charge of the library, and were stopped before they could even gain entry into the cage's tower. The horrors the missing ninjas underwent, the torture they had to endure before they were generously allowed to die, could only be left for the imagination. The fact that the only entrance and exit to the library was located in the Raikage's office should dissuade any sane person from even thinking about it. But Naruto couldn't truly be classified as sane. To Naruto, sneaking into the building was child's play. Konoha had even better security and he snuck in when he was 12. The problem lay on his Ronin friend, who just so happened to refuse any and every ninja art lesson he wanted to give her, preferring the way of the samurai, or as close to the way of the samurai in her case. So he had a problem sneaking her in as well, especially when she was adamant that something would go wrong and their heads would be on the chopping block. He still managed to convince her enough that what he wanted for his birthday was the secret to the current Kage's lightning armor. He broke into the office at the time the Raikage was halfway to Iron Country to attend the Kage's summit, and the 8 and 2 Tails were on a mission to Turtle Island. There was a big gap in the village's defense because of this, and Naruto was made aware of it from the informants his KDC ninja and samurai guards had. He bypassed the seal on the door and picked a seal keycard from the Chunin receptionist, who left it on his desk, as he looked down to look for the schedule, replacing it with an identical hanged cardboard card. From that point, all it took to opening the 5 locking seals on the trapdoor under the cage's desk was making 5 lightning clones and unlocking it at once. From there it was all smooth sailing. Naruto distracted his bodyguard with the wonders of all the books around while he subtly looked for the lightning armor creation scroll. Thankfully, depending on how you look at it, he found the scroll, removed every trap seal on it and stuffed it in his pockets before the alarm bells sounded, when Naruto realized that he had forgotten to check whether removing the trap seals would activate the alarms. On purpose. A large grin stretched on Naruto's face and dragging his partner through the air as she used her free hand to deflect thrown weapons. Naruto now had a 4-inch-long senbon in his grasp as he slashed the few ninjas that managed to overtake them, with help from channeling lightning chakra into their limbs. Naruto spun around, positioning the Ronin in front of him so that she could yell out one of her sword's jutsu, Earth. Leopard bullets. She clenched her sword in her left hand and leveled it on the oncoming ninjas blocking the elevator to the first floor directly under the cage's desk. The result was brownish chakra coating the sword and bullets shaped as claws shot from the tips, 5 every second, and impaled the ninjas after they valiantly attempted to block the attacks. She ignored his look when she refused to let him lead. "I'm not destroying any of these scrolls," and then she added, "and I'm supposed to be protecting you, not the other way around." He got his feet back under him and ran with her, disregarding the fact that they were still holding hands. "I was trying to be a gentleman," she scoffed. "We both know it's too late for that." She skidded into the metal box with her boss and Naruto kicked the control panel, destroying the buttons, and flowing through 5 one-handed hand seals, summoning jutsu, ninja art, web of lies, and from the palm of his hands a sparkling white web blasted out and covered the entrance of the elevator, blocking it off from the other ninjas, and as the web hardened it turned black. They could already hear the ninjas frantically hacking through it. They could see the small, fingernail-sized spiders with red beeping abdomens sluggishly walking on his summoned web with a constant trail of silk coming out of their abdomens to maintain the structural integrity of the web wall for as long as possible. Naruto ran up the walls, Aoki-chan's right hand still in his left, and a senbon slipped out from his right sandal, under his foot, and he flipped backwards back onto the ground, carving cleanly through the metal roof of the elevator and forcing the samurai to flip with him just so he wouldn't twist her arm. He stomped his foot and the acid eroding through the roof opened wide enough for his guard to jump up first and forcing, this time for him, to leap up as well so that she wouldn't tear his arm off with her iron grip. The duo ran up the walls as fast as they could jointly do and Naruto took the liberty of kicking open the closed door of the elevator level above the one they had just escaped from. He smiled and made a flourished movement at it. After you. She rolled her eyes and dragged him with her after her. See? I can be a gentleman, it doesn't count if you have to kick the door open. They stopped abruptly when they beheld the ninjas standing at the ready to intercept them. Not forgetting about the ninjas struggling to break his web, he leaned to her and whispered from the side of his lips, staring at the ninjas standing in front of him, each one first looking hesitant at who they were about to attack before they tried to steal their faces. It counts, she whispered back. No it doesn't, yes it does. No it doesn't, she heatedly whispered. We'll talk about this later, he said with finality. He held his right hand above his head, palm open, and a glowing ball of blue chakra inflated in his hands. This seemed to be the signal for the Kumo ninjas to attack but it was too late. Web bomb. Level 4, flashback end. If the hidden cloud wanted to have any more reason to hate Uzumaki Naruto, the nine-tailed spider, then breaking into their top-secret library and basically making a fool of their defenses was reason enough. This was also including the fact that Orochimaru and Naruto had made a fool out of the village previously on their training journey to Uzushio. Aoki-chan rolled up the map and perched it under her arms as she held up a pair of binoculars to her eyes. Naruto's goggles spun within themselves as they zoomed in. The Ronin nodded. I'm very sure this is the place. Naruto pricked his thumb with a single senbon from his silver launchers and a moment later a small poof of smoke later and a gray spider as large as a horse skittered out of the chakra smoke and knelt down with all 8 legs in front of Naruto. Naruto offered his hand to his partner and she gratefully took it as she mounted on his summons while he jumped on and sat with both legs crossed on the spider's large head, leaving the wide and partially flat abdomen for his partner. Go, he simply said and the spider began his hasty run to Yomisaki Market Town. This was when the female Ronin behind him, also sitting with her legs but with her legendary sword on her lap, her bow crossed over her body and her quiver of arrows on her back, poked the backpack on his back to get his attention and said, the sooner we settle down you can begin the preparations. Her lips were curved upwards in a small smile and her face glowed when he sighed, merely looking over his shoulder for a fraction of a second before he looked back forward to where his summons was taking them to. Sure, I'll start right away. Flashback. 30 minutes after escaping Kumo. Border of Spring Country. Naruto was usually very well composed. It was what people had come to know him for most of all, even more than they acknowledged his skill and strength. As a genin he was able to stare Kakashi and Guy in the eyes and have the presence of mind to deduce what they intended to do to him as well as form a plan to succeed. He had once gone up against the Four Tails Jinchuriki after he and his godmother had passed through Iwa during their training journey without panicking and had that same calm and collected presence of mind to craft a way of stunting the superior ninja's speed for him to run away with Orochimaru, who was less than happy running away. That was a story for another time. Right now though, Naruto was struggling to keep his face as calm as possible and even throwing in a friendly smile at his female partner. You want me to do what? Small droplets of sweat built up on his forehead as the black-haired beauty stepped closer to him, as if to intimidate him, which wasn't working seeing as she was a head shorter than him and he had just been too accustomed to seeing her, and repeated, for my birthday I want you to take me on a date. He leaned away when she raised her right pointer finger and jabbed his chest. You will be on your best behavior. It would be the best day in my life and Cammy help you if I don't enjoy it. He smirked a little and poked her forehead. And what would you do if you don't have fun? I would make every day in your life a living hell and you know I can do that. She growled under her breath and looked to his side. Behind the tree they were hiding behind, at the numerous ninjas that were blazing just past it, none the wiser of their presence. The spiders that covered the tree in a dome of interlocking limbs and fangs, each on melding with the environment, hid them perfectly while they had to super suppress their chakra. Is that so? He whispered and his smirk widened, exposing his serrated teeth, and he looked down on her, making his goggles glint in the limited light of the spider's camouflage. She nodded and stood strong under his scrutiny. You're going to make me suffer? Are you sure about that? Positive, she puffed out her chest bravely. And you're so sure I won't kill you? He cocked his head to the side as he placed a hand on her shoulder, but she looked back at him, even when he removed his goggles and placed them on his forehead, exposing his horrifying vulpine eyes to further intimidate her. It wasn't working. You're not going to kill me, she said, and her voice didn't waver, not even in the slightest. But a small blush grew spread over her nose at the hand on her shoulder. His eyes darkened evilly, an impressive feat because his eyes were always dark with evil, and he gently ran his thumb over her neck, raised it up so that he tucked her black hair over her ear. The standoff lasted a few long minutes, even as the Kumo ninjas returned to their village before the highly ranked Uzumaki leaned back and sighed tiredly. Fine. He waved his right hand and the spiders covering the tree and them fell onto the ground, rushing towards him and entering his pants legs before they returned to their summoning realm through a seal just over his calf. Good, she sighed in relief and turned around, her sword's sheath in her hand and a skip in her step. But I'm not sorry about the whole lightning armor thing, he said to her loudly as he laxly walked with her with his hands behind his head. I've already forgotten about that, she said and smiled up at him. He looked down at her from the corner of his eyes with a raised eyebrow. His right hand reached into the bag on his back and brought out a map. He handed it to her. We're going to Yomisaki Market Town in Spring Country. Mind I ask why? She said as she rolled open the map, not caring that he was in a sour mood. It'll be our new base until all the Akatsuki are dead. It wasn't that he was going to go out of his way and kill them. Rather, he had been informed that the ninja world was gearing towards war subtly. There was unrest all over. Gaara, the one-tails holder, had died after his beast had been extracted but brought back by a sacrifice from an old Suna elder. The 2 and 8 tails were in hiding by order of their cage. The 3-tailed beast had disappeared. The 4 and 5 tails had been kidnapped. The 6 tails was in hiding. The 7 tails had been kidnapped. And he, the 9 tails, was having the time of his life with his samurai best friend. Then after they're dead? I've always liked to live in Kiri, before the war one mean. What do you think? If you like the place, then so do I. They had to quickly round up their continental adventure because of the threat of the Akatsuki, as well as the constant reminder that Naruto needed to find a definite place to call the home base of the KDC. If not, it would be incredibly hard producing drugs and even harder transporting all the money he had, even though they were in small squares by the thousand. Flashback end. The market town was sparsely populated, with the distance between residential houses being more than 15 feet apart, though the market aspect of the town was merely a circular mesh of kiosks. It was pitifully small, making the spider summoner wonder if the place was called Market Village out of some sort of twisted humor. Usually, tall mountains like Yomisaki invited tourists and funds, but with Spring Country and Mountain Country having the most tall mountains, Yomisaki was all but forgotten, leaving it to be populated by traders who couldn't afford the tax of selling in better locations like Spring Country's capital. It was obvious that there were more people than there were houses and shops. He felt eyes on him and his partner as they passed through the village on his summons. He looked to his immediate right, at a deplorable brick house, and grinned widely with his eyes closed, flashing his scary spider-like teeth for the peepers to see, and this seemed to scare them enough for them to close the curtain. Thankfully his goggles were still on. They reached the base of the mountain the town was named after, and Naruto made a quick motion over his shoulder at Aoki-chan, and she stuck onto the back of the spider with her chakra. Sensing this and taking it as a cue, the summons leapt onto the surface of the mountain and blazed upwards. The air began getting thinner and thinner with each ascent, and this didn't seem to faze Naruto, but something in his head clicked and he fell on his back so that he was looking up at his friend, who was struggling to breathe but was too stubborn to call his attention about it. Her face was red and she looked down at him with his coal-black eyes, clearly showing her fight to stay conscious. He smirked and folded his hands behind his head, amused that she actually intended to fight against her urge to breathe rather than ask for his help. Her cheeks were puffed out with air and her hands fisted the short body hair on the top of Spider's abdomen. They stayed like that, him finding it funny that she didn't want to ask for his help and her barely conscious. He finally caved when she slowly began leaning forward with her eyes closed, as if to kiss him, and he caught her by her forehead with his pointer finger holding her up, and he used the other hand to snake into the side of the bag. He miraculously pulled out his blank mask, though without the black head cover, and pushed it to her face. The girl quickly took in numerous deep breaths and got enough strength to hold the mask to her face. He allowed her to use his pointer finger to support her for a few minutes until he was sure she was strong enough to support herself. He removed his hand and placed both of them back behind his head. The mask had a store of clean oxygen in it in case he ever gassed up a room. It could also serve as a breathing apparatus for mountain climbers. "Thank you, sir," she muttered, switching to addressing him formally, and bowed to him slightly, then remembering that he was on his back and looking up at her, so she had to stop herself from bowing fully, like she usually did, because he was still on his back. "I can't kill you, remember? That includes letting the altitude kill you." He smiled widely at her and masterfully kept himself securely on the large spider's back as it ran up the mountain's slanting surface. "Why didn't you want me to help you?" he asked with a curiously raised eyebrow. Aoki-chan secured the mask on her face and gripped her sword again. "I didn't need your help." Naruto scoffed and crossed his right leg over his left. "Need I remind you? You almost lost consciousness not 5 seconds ago. Oxygen is important, you know, then why don't you need it? The nature chakra in me makes it easier to breathe in this altitude." He looked at her dully and poked her forehead. "That doesn't apply to you." She looked away from him up the mountain they were climbing. "Why don't you ask me for help?" she said under her breath, still not looking at him. "I rarely need it," he answered honestly. "Then why did you hire me? You obviously don't need me around to keep you alive." Naruto furrowed his eyebrows as he caught her shaky voice. He sat up and turned around to her. He shuffled closer so that he was about 2 feet away and sat down with his legs crossed. He silently stared at her and she masterfully avoided his eyes before he said, "Believe it or not, I need you." She snorted and he nodded. "Yes, I do." "For what?" She looked at him and he could see her black eyes glaze over from the eye holes of his mask. "You plan on using me for some sort of elaborate experiment? You want to sell me? You want to use my organs? You want to take my sword?" she asked heatedly and clasped her weapon tightly at the last one. "What purpose do I serve to the infamous nine-tailed spider?" He looked surprised at her outburst. "Aoki-chan, I need you, for what? Just tell me." The boy looked like he was struggling to get the words out of his mouth. The girl grabbed his shoulder firmly when he looked away from her, forcing his eyes back on her. She gently removed the goggles over his eyes and placed it between them. "Just tell me, you can trust me." "I do trust you. I trust you more than you can even believe." "Then why can't you tell me the reason I'm even with you?" she begged. "Why do you keep me alive?" "Because I need you," he shouted. He realized what he had said and looked down at his hands, which were shaking. "You keep me sane and you are my stability. I enjoy every day I am with you." His hands shook even more and he clenched them tightly. "When we first met, I wanted you alive just to be Kitsugami's guard, to make his guise more believable, and I wanted to kill you when I was exposed. I wanted to poison you and watch Yudi, just to destroy these feelings so it would stop hurting me, but I didn't. I couldn't. Then I broke my first rule. I got too attached to you and now I don't know what I'll do if you're not with me or if something happens to you." He shrugged weakly and closed his eyes. "One moment I want to impress you. Another I want to make you happy and I always want to see you smile." The girl's mouth dropped at his confession and she unconsciously placed her hands on his own. I need you, Aoki-chan." He frowned heavily at his vulnerable state. He didn't like it. It was a raging inferno that had been building up in his chest ever since the day he had given the girl her bow was being forced out of his mouth, and he didn't like it. He liked being in control and he liked knowing what he was doing. She gently clasped his fisted hands and he relaxed them enough for her hands to slip into his own. But he still had his eyes closed in resignation. "I need you, Aoki-chan. No use fighting it anymore." He felt relieved that he had at least got that much out. There was so much he wanted to say to her but he didn't want to say it. "Naruto," she whispered gently as her hands held his more firmly and smiled at him, but he interrupted her. "We're here." He pulled his hands away and rolled off the spider as it came to an abrupt halt. She got off and was about to rush to him, but with the way he kept his back to her as he looked up at the large cave entrance at the side of the mountain, she stood away. He wasn't physically showing his turmoil of emotion. Rather, he was waging an intense internal battle against himself. He breathed in deeply and spun around to her, a wide, obviously fake, smile on his lips as he opened his arms. Let's clean this place up. Waves and waves of spiders left his trousers and rushed into the caves, eating away the sides to smoothen it out and create more room for them till the interior of the cave was a massive, spacious and neatly made smooth box, similar in size to his first warehouse laboratory. They were not close to the peak of the mountain, rather they were on the only cave entrance there, and it was as cold as it looked and as cold as they imagined. They could even see their breaths and they had to swirl chakra through their bodies to stay warm. The swordswoman looked down in disappointment and passed him into the cave to use her wind control to sweep away the rocks that escaped the tiny spiders off the frigid mountain while allowing both of them time to think. I think I've got a clue where Naruto is hiding, Jiraiya the Toad Sage whispered to his female teammate as she sat down on her designated seat among the other 4 hidden village leaders, with the leader of Iron Country, Mifune, sitting at the head of the table. Can't that wait? She whispered back, carefully looking around and stopping at 2 of the village leaders that hated Konoha the most. Iwa because of Minato and Kumo because of Naruto, not because of Kushina. They lived in a world where information was a highly valued commodity and this commodity traveled almost as fast as electricity. That said, it shouldn't come as a surprise that 5 days ago Kumo had been successfully infiltrated by the last Namikaze and said Namikaze also managed to escape with his friend without either of them sustaining any sort of injury. For the second time, Naruto had broken into Kumo and escaped unharmed. From the logical standpoint, the Raikage should not blame Konoha for what one of their missing ninjas had done, but from the illogical perspective he needed someone tangible and available to place all his deep-seated anger on, and Tsunade, who was almost literally the embodiment of Konoha, seeing as she was the one representing the village, was going to be the person he blamed. The dark-skinned and heavily muscled man scowled at the woman and placed both of his gauntlet hands on the table to further emphasize what he intended to do if he was not in neutral territory. The blonde Sanin couldn't care in the least what he thought, or any of them thought, but her eyes were fixed firmly on Mizukage, maid Terumi, and the playful woman winked at her coyly for her attention, but Tsunade still looked at her suspiciously. Her reason for this was because it was now common knowledge that Kiriyagakure and all of Water Country were openly allied to the KDC, even going as far as to place the KDC's logo, a small one, under their village's symbol on their backs. They weren't the only village or country to do this, seeing as Suna, Spring Country, Bear Country and a host of many more places openly patronized the KDC, but Kiri stood out among them for going the extra mile. There was a large warehouse stationed in Kiri and a smaller warehouse in the capital of the country on a man-made island. Water Country had suffered during the war and they were in drastic need for help, and it was understandable that when they had asked the KDC for help, and this help was provided without hassle, they would be indebted to the organization, so much so that there were now registered Kiri ninjas that guarded the warehouses in Water Country. Regardless of this, Tsunade couldn't help but feel disgust that Kiri had chosen that path instead of seeking help from her old allies. Hidden Mist was still recuperating from the bloody civil war and distrust among their shinobi was still in the air, but the main place they united was in safeguarding the KDC warehouses in their territory. The KDC was supplying them with drugs, medical technology and, at a small scale, food and water for their less privileged civilians who seemed to have suffered more during the war. The illegal organization had gone above and beyond for them, and the result would be for Water Country to do the same. Instinctively, the blonde Hokage knew that it wasn't Naruto that had sanctioned his warehouses to provide food and water but his more compassionate friend. It wasn't in his style to do that. Speaking of compassionate, a few months ago Naruto had sent a letter to her telling that he was going to give Konoha one more chance to allow his company to work, or else they would withdraw all support, including influencing their best customers to withdraw their own support from them. This was after she had pleaded for the Cage to speak to the KDC CEO on her behalf, seeing as she couldn't get contact with him but close allies of the KDC were privy to his whereabouts. Gaara agreed to do this but on the condition that she divert 1/4 of the missions sent to them from Fire Country capital to Sanagakure. The woman begrudgingly accepted and Gaara summarily sent a message to Naruto, and 3 days later a letter was sent back, which the Cage sent to the Hokage. Now, bull pox epidemic ravaging Konoha had been squashed. Though the woman still held some resentment for Naruto for withholding information on where he got the herbs and roots for his medicine, even though she knew that Naruto wasn't entitled to tell her. She looked around and the Cage, Sabaku no Gaara, sent her a polite nod and she returned it. Behind him his siblings, Tamari and Kankuro, stayed alert and made sure that their hands were ready to pull out their weapons. Tsunade had chosen Jiraiya and Yamato to be her bodyguards, the latter because of his high control of his wood release. It would be a great advantage if she was able to drain dry the chakra of anyone that attacked. The cage were patiently waiting for their host to begin their meeting, and 10 minutes after they had all settled and their guards were stationed behind their leaders, the man raised his hand for their attention and they looked at him. The Tsuchikage, Oanoki, requested I call this meeting in my country to discuss the rising threat of an organization hell-bent on destroying all we know and love. No. He called this meeting because he lost both of his Jinchuriki, grunted and met the harsh but silent glare of the fat-nosed cage. Are you going to deny that both of your Jinchuriki were attacked by these S-rank missing ninjas? The old man retorted. Or that sand kid didn't have his beast unsealed? Order. Mifune called and the bickering stopped. Regardless of his ulterior motives, the trouble brewing cannot be ignored. We are continually receiving news of this organization's exploits and each on as troubling as the last. He began counting on his fingers. They took the 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6 tails. He motioned at the Mizukage. They orchestrated the civil war in Kiri. And the 7 tails has disappeared with no trace. I say Konoha took the 7 tails. Oanoki growled and smashed his fist on the solid table, trying to compensate for their lost Jinchuriki. I refute that claim. What purpose would Konoha gain from taking another tailed beast? Tsunade replied coolly with a delicately raised eyebrow. It was the Kyuubi that made you strong. Do you deny that? The old man yelled and Mifune cut in before the female Sanin could reply. Enough. Senseless arguments would get us nowhere. You're calling my claims senseless? The dust release user asked lowly, as if he was trying to understand how anyone in the room would call him senseless. The samurai remained unintimidated. Yes, because as far as I know the 9 tails is not anti-Konoha. He killed 2 of this organization's ninjas, Kakuzu and Hidan, and he has chosen to keep his Kitsugami drug company active in Konoha. He turned to Tsunade. Or am I wrong? She shook her head. No. Do you know where this boy is? Mifune asked. Since he can kill 2, then he can kill more of them. The woman shook her head. We don't need the Kyuubi brat to kill those S-rank. I have ninjas in my ranks that are capable of destroying them, A said, and his guards, Samui and Darui, silently agreed. If I may, Gaara piped up and drew their attention. I'm in regular correspondence with Naruto-san and he has made it known to me that he will not actively seek out this organization, and there's your answer. The brat is too afraid to fight them. I bet he barely won against Kakuzu and Hidan, Oanoki grumbled. On the contrary, my sister, Aoki-chan, works for him and I have no doubt she participated in their deaths. Mifune said stoically. I need not emphasize what she is capable of. But I digress. We need to form a united front and end this threat before it gets out of hand. We don't know why that organization is gathering all those tailed beasts, but I am sure that their intentions are not peaceful. And you're right, old man. A deep voice intoned from the far end of the room on another table, away from the cages assembled at the other side. Our intentions are not peaceful. A vortex of air swirled on the spot the voice had come from and a man wearing an orange mask styled in a spiral so as to emphasize his loan for which the Kamui had come from appeared before them, sitting laxly on the table. His black cloak with red clouds symbolized who he was and the cages all abruptly got their feet, ready for a fight. All his plans had already been set in motion. All his pawns had been influenced and were geared to fight and all he had to do was light the match that would set the world ablaze. The air was taut with tension and this tension thickened as Obito Uchiha declared war on the elemental nations. It had taken the duo a full day of effort, Shadow Clones and Spider, Snake summons to get their temporary home ready but they were finally done. The walls of the cave were now smoothed down and were painted red and gray, to give the place a sort of warmth and the rocks the tiny spiders ate were spat back out as a sort of liquid rock so that they would form separate rooms. A main laboratory, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen and a bathroom with a complex drainage system that made us of the mountain slope to lead the water down into the ground at the base of the mountain, a storeroom and finally a large laboratory suited up with all of his equipment and chemicals. The interior had been painted red and gray, mostly to give the feeling of warmth. He had set up a generator outside the cave, protected by a small steel house augmented by seals to withstand the cold and the wind, to provide electricity in the cave, which at this point didn't look like a cave or feel like a cave, especially with the wooden boards they set up to cover the wide open mouth of the cave, also supporting it with seals. Naruto had taken the liberty of using a seal he called atmospheric support seal, which basically circled around the mountain, specifically the area the cave was located, and ensured replicated the effect of the atmosphere on ground level. Besides the warmth, it mostly made the place livable without Naruto's gas masks. The seal could run infinitely because it was powered by nature chakra, which could be found anywhere if the person looked well enough. There was level ground for a few yards in front of the mouth of the cave, giving both of them space to exercise. It was their home for now. The problem was that to get down the mountain they had to make use of summons, and Aoki-chan had to wear a mask until they got to the base of the mountain. It was a sacrifice they had to make. The top of the mountain was a secured location. No sane person would want to climb that high, and it was private. Exactly what Naruto wanted and what he was used to. The blonde scientist stood at the top of the mountain with his black-haired Ronin friend beside him, admiring their home from outside. He was wearing a red and gray hoodie with a black short-sleeved shirt underneath and black ninja pants. He had bandages wrapped around his ankles, leading into his black shinobi sandals. While his partner wore a white hoodie with the symbol for the Spider Clan stitched onto her right upper arm. Her pants were equally white as well as her sandals. She also had her sword strapped to her side and her bow and arrow across her torso. The duo weren't yet back to speaking comfortably with each other, but they weren't outrightly ignoring each other. Naruto was trying his best to get her back to her comfort zone around him. The boy didn't have a sheath for his grass cutter blade, so he chose to leave it in his backpack, which was on his back. He sent the girl a small smile as he sat down at the edge of the mountain, just close to the seal's protection, and she followed suit, and they both watched the sunset. The next day came slowly and Naruto leapt out of his bed, perky and eager to get the day started. It was 4 in the morning and he sat down on his desk, clean as a whistle, and sent out several letters to his branch warehouses with his spider and snake summons, as well as to the brothel in Konoha, thanking them for their services and sealing in several thousands of ryu as their payment. He needed to summon a few shadow clones to get the writing done, and he needed to summon a few more to begin their research into breaking the barriers of the universe. Aoki-chan woke up at 6 in the morning sharp, mainly because she did her regular night rounds to watch their new home before leaving it for a snake summon. Groggily, she greeted her superior before she too went to the bathroom to freshen up. When she came out, Naruto gave her the task of familiarizing herself with the environment and its occupants in Yomisaki Market Town, saying that it wouldn't do if they didn't at least try to know their new neighbors. Deep down, Aoki-chan knew that although it seemed like he didn't want her around him, he just didn't want her to be idle. Just like how they went about their business in Konoha, she would work not just as his bodyguard but as his spokesperson as well. Although Aoki-chan was closely affiliated to Naruto, she didn't want to sign her name on the spider summoning scroll, saying that she had lasted long enough without the summons and she would last longer without them. So Naruto had to summon a large snake to take her down the mountain to the market town. The state of things at the base of the mountain was deplorable. Houses were falling apart, the market was an eyesore, and the people were ill-prepared for the cold their region of the country was in, seeing as even though the former daimyo of the country, Doden, had been overthrown by his niece, Koyuki Kazuhana, the new daimyo changed Snow Country to Spring Country, destroying the machine that made the country as cold as it was named, though this didn't affect all of the country because the country bordered frigid country. Yomisaki Market Town was bordering frigid country, so it didn't enjoy the privileges of the change of government. Aoki-chan was renowned across the continent as the broken child and the dark angel of the 5 elements, so she had already been seen as a ruthless person not to be messed with, and this was further reinforced by her battle style. Few knew her as kind. This included her boss, her adopted brother, and a few of the people in Iron Country, and seeing the deplorable lives the people were living and how they each went out of their way to welcome her touched something in her. These people had been forgotten by the world because they were not able to keep up with its fast-paced and ever-developing nature, mostly because their government had forgotten them first. They were all poor, but they lived and worked as a family, sharing what they had and could, even though there weren't that many customers that patronized their market. The Dark Angel felt obligated to help them, and she immediately rushed back up the mountain with the large snake, much to the wonder of the people, and dragged Naruto down. It was a day of surprise for the people of Yomisaki. They were being treated to many firsts in just one day. The first time they had seen a samurai, the first time they had seen a ninja that wasn't trying to steal from them, the first time they had seen a snake that size, the first time they had seen a teenager with a mouthful of serrated teeth, which he wasn't afraid to flash, the first time they had met someone that freely gave them money with the only condition being they shouldn't tell anyone they were living there, and many more firsts. The snow that almost constantly fell around Yomisaki was harsh and, from Aoki-chan's prodding, Naruto summoned spiders, each one bearing clothes they had crafted and shared it to the multitude. The sheer quality of the clothing had them question whether or not it was Kami that had come to aid them. The reason Naruto was being so out of character was because when Aoki-chan had slammed back into their new home, out of breath and desperate for his attention, and dragged him all the way down the mountain, on a summons of course, he listened to her rant. From what he could deduce from her rush of words, she really wanted to help the people of Yomisaki, and he had already opened up to her that making her happy was his top priority. It was hard to believe, seeing as he was considered bloodthirsty and selfish, but he had learnt to just accept those feelings instead of allowing them to kill him. Though he did need a lot of convincing to do it. "Boss, just look at them. They need help," the samurai implored and motioned at them. Naruto looked over them with unconvinced and dull eyes. "It isn't our jobs to help them, leave it to their government," he said with a flippant wave and was about to ascend the mountain again, but the Ronin grabbed his hand and he paused. "You'll gain so much from helping them, think about it," she said and stroked a tender part of his attention masterfully, knowing that he would forever look at the personal gains. The KDC boss rolled his eyes. "And what will I get from helping them?" She thought and hesitantly replied, "A warm feeling in your chest." Naruto shook his head and patted her head. "I'm sure we'll both survive if I don't get that warm feeling." He said it like he was talking to a toddler and the usual blush spread across her nose from the contact. "What about their support?" She hastily added, "Nearly half of the continent is supporting me, through my company, but still me," he replied back. She still refused to let go of his hand. "How about this? If this place is properly set up and run, then a percentage of their profits would go to you." The boy still didn't look convinced, and for good reason too. He had so much money that he didn't care about it. Money from his organization, money his godmother had willed to him, which he was still gathering from all of the different banks she deposited them in. Money he got as goodwill from countries he set up KDC warehouses in, and the money he made in Konoha from all his other dirty deals. He could easily buy the most expensive but sophisticated equipment and weapons, such as his silver Senbon launchers, the launcher's curved black stealth guards, and Aoki-chan's bow and arrows. Not forgetting the fact that he didn't need to buy clothes because his primary summons, the Spider Clan, was able to create any kind of cloth with any texture that was of excellent quality. He needed to set apart approximately 10 billion ryu to pay all of his workers across the continent, which included the guards as well and the bonuses for stellar work. This also included the fact that he was in close contact with all of his branch, so that he was aware of what was in desperate need there, whether it was a broken doorknob to more mosquito repellent for those in his tropical branches. This was all mostly through a trusted foreman in charge of all the warehouse's productivity and sales, who constantly traveled around, with his family or not, to keep an eye on the branches. Everyone was happy and loyal as long as they kept getting their monthly wages. Needless to say, Uzumaki Naruto was not in dire need for money. The black-haired girl continued, "It would boost your reputation as a person that can make a town prosper if he gave it a thought." That convinced him. Aoki-chan was unofficially his company's public relations officer. This meant that she helped him deal with delicate matters such as providing support to countries and villages so as to boost the KDC's image and further their goals of making it an international franchise. Left to him, his first instinct would be to kill any aggressor that went against his business, and this was what he would have done to Konoha if the samurai had not stepped in before him and withdrew the warehouse branches in Fire Country, to open Konoha's eyes that even though the KDC was illegal, they couldn't deny how much they had helped them, and also a warning to the other countries he had branch warehouses in that he wouldn't be partial, seeing as he used his home village as an example to all. Naruto had come to realize that if he wanted a wider customer base, he needed to show a little bit of restraint in his heavy-handedness. He wasn't brought up in the most compassionate of environments, so he wasn't used to lending a helping hand just because he could. And he was faced with the reality that people would take any means necessary to destroy him if he did not show that the KDC wasn't all bad. Aoki-chan, though, although brought up in a strict samurai household in a family that valued strength and loyalty, had experienced a large measure of compassion in her life. Bifune might have been a formal man, but he loved all of his children equally, showing them this with various acts of kindness, and she being the only female and performing better than her older brothers, he had lessened his strictness on her and allowed her room to grow on her own. His trust in her was one of the many acts of kindness to her. Her partially well-rounded upbringing was what made Naruto trust a fair portion of control of his business to her, and he mostly trusted her judgment for the most part because she had never disappointed him in anything he set her to do. Whether on a mission or to deal with a problem in a branch, the results she brought back to him were always satisfying. So, once again, he decided to trust her judgment. "Fine, we'll spruce this place up, but we're not helping them sell their stuff," he said, and the girl bowed deeply. "That's all I ask, boss." He ruffled her hair before he turned to the multitude of people eagerly looking at him. "Let's get this place cleaned up." He bent onto the snowy ground and drew a fairly large summoning circle. When he was done, he added a drop of his blood on it and a poof of smoke erupted from the seal. 5 white, lion-sized spiders with the kanji for clothmaker drawn on their abdomens marched out of the smoke, each one hefting large sealing scrolls between 2 of their front legs. These spiders laid the scrolls on the ground and unrolled them in tandem, revealing several storage seals drawn neatly on it. Aoki-chan, who couldn't make clones, was the one to hand them the clothes, and the people profusely thanked them, while the spiders looked down at them with bright red eyes, silent as night, watched on in astonishment as their master's servant handed out clothes. Naruto walked past them, through the eager crowd of very appreciative people to the middle of the town, ignoring the people that groveled as he passed them and the older residents that eagerly wanted to shake his hands, but withdrew their hands as he hissed at them. He got to the center of the town and a few people turned to look at him, the others clamoring to get clothes from the giant spiders and the kind teenager. The boy hummed to himself as he examined the layout of the houses and assumed that the houses were built to face each other but leave a wide berth between them for a mass of people to walk through. This space between the houses led further down to 2 iron rods that had been jammed into the ground, probably to symbolize the entrance of the town. Although Naruto had been privileged enough to be able to use all 5 nature transformations from training in all, control his beast's chakra, nature chakra and an array of other things, he wasn't able to use wood release. So he wasn't able to erect houses out of the ground like he had heard a drunken Kakashi rant about when he was a 6-year-old child posing as a rich adult. Yamato Tenzo was the wood release user's name, and Naruto still hadn't met him. He wasn't able to steal even a fingernail from this Yamato, so he could replicate the legendary Kekai Genkei, but he was content with what he could do. The 9-tailed spider held up a half-ram-hand seal, multiple shadow clone jutsu. Over 30 identical clones of his were summoned out of numerous plumes of smoke, attracting the eyes of the townspeople, and Naruto commanded them to search for trees. If they found trees, they would seal them into storage seals and bring them back. The display for the next 6 hours was proof enough that if Naruto put his mind to something, it would result in staggering success, just like with his spider clan. The clones had to travel south of the town to a warmer part of Spring Country known for its vegetation and dense forests, luckily for them, or else they would have been forced to travel even further down. The trees were brought back and the original Naruto summoned even more clones and they began constructions, making them realize that as the clones were searching for trees, Naruto had been busy crafting a blueprint for the houses he wanted to build. It was a basic structure that had 2 spacious bedrooms, 2 bathrooms inside the house, a living room, a fully furnished kitchen, parlor and a front porch facing their neighbors across the street. The added clones, supported by a few snakes to carry the chopped up wood, built the houses. For each completed house, the real Naruto drew special reinforcement seals that supported the structure for as long as there was nature chakra in the air. He had been taught this seal by his godmother in Whirlpool Village. They made the wood as strong as steel, able to take a full-on chakra-enhanced punch and still be able to stay on the ground. The effect was like with electricity. Part of the strength in the punch was pushed harmlessly into the ground while the rest was deflected back to the attacker. This only worked if the attacker was using chakra, if not it would merely injure the person. Naruto used a tunneling jutsu to create a deep well where clean water could be pumped out. This water was connected to the house via plastic pipes at the backs of the houses, so if they wanted water in their rooms they had to lug it into the house by themselves. He placed sure that the roofs of the house were made out of wood as well that, because of the seal, couldn't rot from rain or exposure to the elements. He crafted 3 wind turbines from wood as well, smoothing it out and painting it red, to provide electricity to the various houses. The last thing he did was form fences to provide the individual houses with privacy. It was exhausting work, but he was done. The people of Yomisaki watched as their town was recreated by a total stranger. Gratitude couldn't be expressed with mere words, and Naruto tiredly ignored them and slumped onto the ground with his back leaning on the fence of a random house. They flocked around him, noisily thanking him while he rested and replenished his lost chakra. He closed his eyes and channeled the noise out. Aoki-chan ushered the families into their houses, allowing her master to rest, while she personally dealt with the first ever threat to their new home by herself. 6 Konoha missing ninjas that had heard the clamor from a distance and took it as an opportunity to take money from weaker civilians chose to travel to Yomisaki. They were summarily dispatched of by the samurai. 1 week later, the world was indeed on fire. Identical white plant men were attacking villages, usually eating a dead ninja or swallowing small drops of blood from living ninjas and taking his form to further their attacks. The remaining Akatsuki had been paired to reduce the morale of ninjas from the other villages by displaying their full strengths against them. Worldwide, formerly dead ninjas of unbelievable caliber were being brought back, and they were added to the ranks of the Akatsuki, each one controlled by a mysterious man who focused their attacks with the aim of finding the 9 tails. Most suspected that the strongest of them was yet to be summoned, and this fearful prospect was what united the countries of the continent. Battles had been fought with these undead warrior, and they had been mostly lost because the undead were immediately revived, leaving the only other option for the allied ninjas to seal them away. This would have been easier if not for the frequent attacks from the Akatsuki, who had already captured the 7 and 2 tails in one of their many campaigns. The 2 tails had been captured and her beast removed after she had been intercepted on her way to Waterfall by Sasori and Deidara to provide support after hearing of the minor village's trouble with active ninjas. She had been with her team and made the ultimate sacrifice of telling them to retreat while she held the S rank off. The 7 tails had been tracked to be hiding and working in a KDC branch house in Wave Country. The green-haired girl had been working there since the day Waterfall threw her away out of fear that their village would be attacked by the Akatsuki. She had been sighted and summarily captured by the Akatsuki after their civilian spies, or puppets, notified her of her presence. This had happened on the day Naruto had finally been located. Her captors had been the 6 Paths of Pain and Conan. All the nations of the world were afraid that the end was near. The dead were being brought back. White plant clones were impersonating ninjas and killing ranks from within, and the countries were losing their frantic fight for survival against legends in the history books and S-rank warriors. Their hope returned when Itachi Uchiha defected from the organization and returned to Konoha, but it was fizzling when they realized his deteriorating health, despite that he was also participating in the war in their side. The only tailed beasts left were the 8 and 9 tails, and the former was in the thick of the fight. The latter, even though he was aware that the world was crumbling at the seams, had shown no interest in the war. He spent his days telling stories in houses in front of a large crowd of eager listeners. He was content, albeit bored, that so far he had no rival in strength. The world could utilize his medicine however they wanted, and this freedom had transformed his products into highly valued commodities, especially because they had been able to bring people out of the hospital faster than their own drugs. The KDC had gone even further underground in their dealing, with each warehouse covered in triple rank illusions, and the delivery people now strictly used the underground tunnels and railways to move their goods to their intended destination. The owner of the drug empire had assumed that that would be enough help to turn the tide of the war. He didn't need to necessarily go out of his way to fight, but he was wrong. He was still desperately needed, not just his drugs or his technology. The nations against the 9 tails chose to swallow their pride and send out a few of their ninjas to search and retrieve the elusive Jinchuriki to plead with him to help them fight for the world's survival. The Konoha ninjas found him first, but so did Obito and Kisame. And this is where we find ourselves. Flashback end. The hand-to-hand fight between Naruto and Obito was eerily similar to watching a dance. Both of their offensive, counters and defensive moves melded into each other smoothly, creating an opportunity for them to try again, but usually resulted in the same thing. It was hauntingly like his battle with Naruto's father, and the end result of that was ARAs in Gonto the back and weeks of recuperation, and despite his effort of trying to bypass Naruto's blocks, the boy would always see it coming and adjust accordingly, all with an infuriating toothy grin on the boy's face. The Uchiha clashed his forearm against Naruto's and slapped the knee to his stomach back down while driving his own knee towards Naruto's side, but the teen spun away from the attack and slashed his pincers at the limb, which was hastily withdrawn. The Uzumaki cut upwards, forcing the masked man to make himself intangible. This surprised Naruto for a fraction of a second, long enough for Obito to flip backwards and squarely drive his foot under Naruto's chin. The spider summoner grunted and flipped backwards as well, but when he landed he still had the excited grin on his face. A grin that sent shivers down Jiraiya's spine because it was scarily similar to Minato's grin during a fast-paced fight, crazed and bloodthirsty. The Namikaze learned it from his older sister. The blonde eagerly blurred right back to the Uchiha, even before the man had gotten his feet back on the ground, and did something that shocked all the watchers, something that his unpredictability managed to bypass the other fighters' Sharingan. He flickered to Obito as his toes touched the ground, and punched forward. The man began the motions for slapping the attack away but was surprised to see that he merely slapped the long senbon Naruto was using away, a needle Naruto shot to him to draw most of his attention. He leaned away from the fist that wafted across his mask but not away from the unforgiving elbow Naruto smashed into his face. The cracking sound was horrifying to all the listeners, and the follow-up spinning heel kick to the dazed Uchiha's neck was equally bone-chilling to watch. The orange-masked man careened away but got his right hand under him to flip back to his feet. He faced Naruto and idly dusted his shoulder, showing how much it didn't hurt, but this only got Naruto's eyes even more deranged with battle lust. "How about going all out, stranger? That way I won't feel bad killing you," the blonde called to his opponent, his hands itching to punch the masked stranger. "You're still a brat. A brat that had gotten a taste of powerful chakra and thinks he's invincible. There will be no point fighting you at full strength," Obito answered coolly as his cloak fluttered weakly in the low winds of the town. He held up his right hand and clenched it for Naruto to see. "But I advise you to take me seriously. Anything less than your best would be your end," Naruto hummed in thought and scratched his chin before he shook his head negatively. "You're not worth it. I've met grave robbers better than you." This comment obviously touched a small part of Obito, though he remained relatively cool-headed. "Then come and feel the strength of an Uchiha." He opened his hand and motioned Naruto to come at him. "If you dare." The teenage spider summoner cracked his neck and commanded his long senbon to slide back into his launcher, before he flashed back to his opponent, faster than any untrained eye could catch. The blurring fight continued, each driving the other back but still holding back a measure. Obito was not using all of his strength and Naruto was not using Kyuubi's chakra or nature chakra, or the combination, merely his own chakra. Further away from them, the fight between Kisame and Aoki-chan, which on the surface would look like the more experienced swordsman was winning, was in reality the opposite. With each sword clash and each strain for dominance, Kisame noticed something strange, which was made even clearer when the ground beneath his feet began rebelling against him. The Onmyogen, the all-elemental sword, was a legendary weapon that bestowed its chosen user the control of every element, whether it was from the sword or from the user. Every part of the sword could be used, even its sheath, and stories had been told that if the user had enough control over the sword he was able to command a demon from the underworld to come to his aid. Seeing as the sword had been forged in the mountains of Demon Country out of obsidian steel, which was an evil, cursed metal, the hide of a demon dragon, the tears of a saintly fire country monk and the blood sacrifice of the high priest, while the sheath had been made from a demon wolf's hide. It was said that if a person, other than the person the sword chose, touched the sword, their souls would be sucked into the sword and used to power it. This also applied to people the swordsman killed, further pushing the idea that the wielder could summon demons at will. Only 2 people in history had been recorded using the sword. The first was a featureless man from Kiriagakure, usually thought to be the home of legendary blades, before the person had willingly handed the blade to the priests of Demon Country. Many years later it had been stolen by a woman who connected the blade with her child by making a blood sacrifice agreement with the god of death for reasons people were unaware of. Aoki-chan didn't know why she had been given the cursed sword, but that fact never stopped her from fully mastering it when she was 13 and about to be named leader of Iron Country. Her sword could indeed use souls to power it if she didn't want to use her own chakra, and she was able to give control of the blade to anyone of her choice, Naruto. Her only hurdle till date being she had to endure the torture of the pitiful moans and whispers of the souls in her sword speaking to her all at once and struggling to get free. Kisame had never fought against an Omniogen user before, so he was almost running in the dark, almost being he had slain plenty of samurai, and he believed that since the Dark Angel was a samurai she would be predictable. He was obviously wrong. First, because she used her sheath to fight as well. Samurai didn't do that. Second was that she used more elemental attacks than a regular samurai, and the last reason was that she was spending way too much time around Naruto. Although most of the sword's abilities were a mystery to Kisame, mainly because all that went against it weren't alive anymore, one outstanding precaution stood out. Don't ever let the blade touch you, even if it's a minor graze. Just like with Samahata, smoke wafted off the blade and the sounds of torment flittered in the air as she blocked an attack from Kisame. He commanded his sword to suck out the chakra, but it remained unresponsive, seeing as she wasn't using chakra, merely the souls of the slain stored in her blade. He hacked and slashed at her savagely, using his superior strength to push her backwards into a more defensive and desperate position, until they were close to 10 feet from the base of the mountain before she turned on the offensive. She twirled her sheath dexterously and swiped it towards his left leg, but he blocked it easily. She jabbed her weapon at his chest and he was forced to lean away, watching, impressed, as her weapon sliced through his cloak and barely grazed his shirt, though not touching his skin. Aoki-chan followed up with a firm foot planted in his stomach and using that foot as a purchase to run up his torso and smashing her knee into his chin. This was the time Kisame chose to fully unleash his sword. Samahata frilled out dangerously and bent in his grip towards the samurai as she prepared to leap away from him after her last attack. She grit her teeth in effort and his concentration was thrown off when the ground beneath his feet shifted away from the mountain a full foot, allowing her to flip backwards over the sentient sword. The strongest of the 7 swordsmen of the mist commanded his weapon to shorten back to its normal length, but its purple scales remained dangerously frilled. He stood up straight and sharply smirked at the Ronin as she got into a defensive stance, making sure to lick the small trickle of blood that came from his mouth. "You're not half bad for a samurai," she didn't reply, only tightening her stance. "I've always wanted to know what would happen if Samahata broke your sword, but sadly we're just here to cripple you beyond repair." He blinked once and she was in front of him, her blade rising upwards diagonally, but he blocked it swiftly against his own sword. He anticipated her sheath coming into play and summarily used the sole of his right foot to block it. He smirked cockily after this but frowned when the girl's focused expression morphed into a playful one. "Got you." Kisame looked down at his position and realized that his left foot was swallowed up into the ground to his ankle. He then quickly realized another thing. Both of his legs were far apart. It was much too late to dodge the pillar of earth that rocketed out of the ground between his legs and solidly struck his groin. His eyes widened in pain, and it was only when his sword took the initiative to extend and surge towards her did he get enough control to break his leg out of the ground. The sentient sword descended on the samurai and she leapt back several times to avoid it, but it dipped and moved in different directions, growing in size and ravenous appetite for her blood and chakra. Sparks flew as her cursed blade deflected the massive purple sword, jumping away when it moved unexpectedly. Meanwhile, Kisame was struggling to stand, his groin still hurt. Samahata squealed in accomplishment as he wrapped the Ronin in its elastic handle and brought its full weight down forcefully on her head like a hammer. There was tense silence and the purple sword kept on squeaking and making shrill cries of joy, until it abruptly stopped and a large pillar of earth exploded from the ground and pushed it off, entangling its grayish-white handle enough for any watcher to see Aoki-chan standing in the last place she had been seen, although there were numerous bleeding cuts across her face and her left, sheath-bearing arm. Her blade had been stabbed into the earth and her sheath was crossed over her head while the pillar of earth had risen up behind her to throw the sword off. She slid her sword into its unbreakable sheath, leveled it at her opponent and yelled, "Wind! Shot!" The black swordholder rocketed off the blade at impossible speeds and Kisame had to hastily command his weapon back to him so he could use it to cross his midsection. The weapon smashed against the sentient sword and the swordmaster had to apply chakra to his feet so that he wouldn't skid away too much. Obito ducked a swing for his head and nailed Naruto's cheek, drove his knee into the boy's side and head-butted him. Infuriatingly enough, Naruto still got up and charged. This was when the Uchiha noticed a pattern he would never had noticed if he did not have the Sharingan. Naruto was naturally unpredictable, inheriting it from his mother, so he did not have to put any effort in his fighting skills to be unpredictable. This unpredictability was fluid enough to confuse his 3-tomo dojutsu, and with this perk he didn't need to put conscious effort into being unpredictable. Now though, as he hopped away 3 times from a senbon barrage from the boys' launchers, he noticed something strange. Naruto was being predictable. He could even go as far as saying that he was able to see 3 steps ahead of him, when at the beginning of the fight he was only able to see 1/3 of a second ahead of the blonde. It couldn't have been exhaustion, because as far as he knew Naruto had much more chakra than anyone he had ever met and more stamina than any Kage he had faced. The Uchiha couldn't read anything from Naruto's maniacal expression other than his death, so he didn't bother looking too much at it, but he noticed the boy's plan too late. He had been driven to the makeshift gate of the town, under the guise of dodging backwards from Naruto's insistent attacks, and Naruto changed the direction of his attacks to his immediate right, and Obito had little option but to follow in his lead since he couldn't let his defense leak for a world-renowned trickster to capitalize on. Abruptly he froze in place, in the position of countering a kick, and a trap seal beneath his glowed with blue, ominous light. His eye widened in horror and Naruto held the half-ram seal. He opened his mouth wide, unhinging his jaws, and the deadly Kusanagi blade shot out. The Uchiha quickly activated his Mangekyo, knowing he wouldn't be able to physically overpower a trap seal that made use of Naruto's dense chakra, and a spinning vortex sucked him in, but not in time for the blade to slice across his upper right arm, deep enough to graze the bone, before it impaled the ground. Naruto stayed where he was, after fixing his jaw, and made sure that the attacker had truly gone before he walked to his sword, handed down to him by its former user, Orochimaru of the Sannin, and he pushed it into the backpack on his back like a regular sword user would sheath his sword, and the blade disappeared like the bag had enough space in it. Meanwhile, Kisame and Aoki-chan were frantically attacking each other. Each spark of contact rained down and every limb that reached to attack the other was countered. The older swordman's clothes had seen better days, with cuts littering its surface and even his whole left sleeve gone. Neither of them wanted to admit defeat, so they kept slashing and slicing until he felt a bloody hand on his shoulder. "We have what we need, let's go," the voice sounded pained. He was then dragged into the kamui. The samurai stood rigidly for a few seconds before she straightened up and smoothly sheathed her blade. Naruto walked to her and stopped as he was about to pass her. He frowned at the cuts on his face and she could see his fists tighten. On the surface he looked like he was staring at the sunset, deadpan, but inside he was enraged that her opponent had gotten her in her present state. Blood on her face and left arm from numerous cuts. Her coat sleeves had jagged slashes perforating it, exposing some of her smooth tan skin. Skin Naruto did not want any other living creature to see, besides him. The primal part of him wanted to track Kisame down and make a coat out of his skin, but the sensible part of him just barely wrangled him back in control after she sent him a knowing look, even lifting a corner of her lips slyly. A silent challenge he would address when everything had been settled for the day and they were in the privacy of their cave. He opened his right fist and a single blue pill was in the middle of his palm. "Take this." She immediately swallowed it and sighed as the cuts on her face and arm began knitting back together. "Though there was still blood, go and get cleaned up, I'll deal with our other guests." He raised a single finger for her to be quiet, and the quick motion and the fact that he was still technically her boss had her snap her lips shut. "Come back when you're done." She bowed quickly and stomped to the mountain. She looked up hesitantly at the height of the mountain before she looked at Naruto pleadingly. He slowly smiled at her, realizing what the problem was. "Is there a problem?" She closed her eyes tightly and her fists tightened. He watched on in amusement as 2 minutes passed of her tightly closing her lips. "Please," she shouted, and he laughed under his breath as he summoned a spider to take her up to their cave home. She climbed onto it and patted the spider. The creature raced up the steep mountain to their temporary home. The boy didn't look or feel winded for his long drawn-out fight against the Uchiha, so he leisurely walked to the town's entrance with his hands lazily behind his head, and waited for the Konoha ninjas to make an appearance. The ninjas walked out of their hiding place of a large rock a mile away from Yomisaki town. Although Naruto could sense he couldn't discern who was who unless he made use of his second or third pair of eyes, or second nose, the dots on his forehead and nose. And that would be a waste of chakra. Basically, anyone he couldn't sense monumental chakra from he would never take seriously. Obito Uchiha, though had a large well of chakra, didn't have the capacity large enough to interest Naruto. So, he was surprised at who Konoha had sent to capture him, seeing as that was the only reason he thought they were here in the first place. Those he had met were now different. Those he had not were piquing his interest enough to look over. Kakashi looked like he had seen better days. His uniform was rugged, though clean enough. He had bandages wrapped tightly around his left arm, from fingers to shoulder, and all round tired. Even though Sasuke was looking at him with a straight face, Naruto could see the war of words he wanted to unleash on him. The Uchiha also looked tired but all the more eager to return to wherever he had come from. He had on a Junin flag jacket. Sakura looked down when his eyes clashed with hers. A tinge of red crept up her neck and covered her cheeks. She was in a Chunin flag jacket, prompting Naruto to nod in acknowledgement that she had at least bettered herself. Sai was still Sai with his fake smile in place and masterfully hiding his exhaustion he felt. He wore a Junin flag jacket. He skipped over analyzing Jiraiya, not caring what he went through, to the person he assumed was called Yamato. He deduced this because he could sense a perfect mixture of water and earth affinity chakra in him, an awfully large store of it. The man, whose large iris made the spider summoner a little bit uncomfortable, sent the boy an appreciative smile, for what he was yet to find out. Jiraiya took the initiative to speak first. "Your godmother really taught you well, kid. She's a perfectionist." Naruto replied simply with a shrug. He crossed his arm and subtly began to prepare his chakra to defend him if the ninjas chose to attack, but curious enough he could not even see the minute signs that their muscles were geared to attack. Quite frankly, their hands were at their sides and their shoulders sagged. What is going on? You just did what no one else could do and you were still holding back. Kakashi spoke above what Jiraiya had to say. The Sannin was clearly floored by Naruto's response. You critically injured Madara Uchiha. Naruto didn't make use of his extra eyes and nose to fight. Not even using more than 3 jutsu, and they were just the trap seal, the Senbon barrage, and summoning the Kusanagi from his mouth. He didn't want to take me seriously, so I didn't take him seriously. He got what happens when I'm toyed with. And I'm sure you people would know that that isn't Uchiha Madara. They nodded and boy shifted on his feet, looking at each person again. Now why are you people here? There was a war of emotions broiling on their faces. Naruto-kun. Sakura muttered, still looking at his feet but more out of admission that he was past her skills. We need your help. This time it was the blonde scientist that was floored. Of all the times Konoha ninjas had come to retrieve him, the reasons had all been the same, for him to face justice or to collect his bounty. Tsunade had changed his A rank entry to an S rank flee on sight so that he would be left alone, but people from her village still went behind her back to take him on. He was aware of the war burning a path of destruction through the continent, and he assumed that his personal help wouldn't be needed because he had left a few of his warehouses still fully manned and operational just for the countries. His products were revolutionary, able to heal a severe cut to the stomach in mere hours or provide a new limb to an amputee, and with said limb being easy to use. He was positive that they wouldn't need his help. He was the outcast, the brat, the demon. From birth he had been predestined to be the one they hated, the one who was meant to suffer. Why would they need his help? Why? He asked. Yamato coughed into his fist and said, "We are losing this war. There are too many casualties that even your drugs cannot fully heal. The enemy has outnumbered us and our morale is low. A few of the soldiers have even walked to their deaths, unarmed. Why do you need my help?" Naruto repeated with a sharp frown. What can I do that none of the other shinobi cannot? No one wanted to speak, but, surprising enough, it was Sasuke that continued, everything. You can do everything. Naruto cocked his head to the side in confusion and Sasuke kept speaking. Your skills are well-rounded and you're a master of many things. Most people cannot be scientists and masters of taijutsu or ninjutsu and fuinjutsu masters at the same time. It is either one, but you. He had to swallow his pride to admit this. Or a master of all, not all. I can't perform genjutsu. But they don't need to know that, the blonde blissfully thought. So you believe that if I participate in this war one would make a difference? Yes. Kakashi spoke, but Naruto held his hand up for him to stop and pointed at Jiraiya. No, I want him to say it. The toad sage screwed his lips to the side in distaste and Naruto clenched his teeth, trying to maintain a straight face. The sage abruptly bowed his head and said, "Yes, Naruto, you would make a big difference in the war." From the admission Naruto felt another weight on his chest lift off him. His godmother had told him of stories of when Kushina was still pregnant. The busy snake summoner would take at least 30 minutes of her time to visit the Uzumaki and at least get on good terms with her before he was born. Kushina and Orochimaru might not have liked each other, even borderline hated each other, but what they had in common was Minato, whom the Sannin was gradually distancing herself from. Throughout her pregnancy, Jiraiya had been out of the village. She took the liberty of sending him messages and telling him her plans to take care of their godchild, but the letters he sent back was what made the woman hate the Toad Sage. She even showed him the letters he sent to her, each one clearly outlining the fact that he didn't care what happened to the child. That he will be nothing if not for his sole guidance. Naruto never had faith on his godfather, but it still chipped off a part of his heart to read that the man didn't care what happened to him, as long as he was part of his future. Needless to say that his whole life had been proof enough that Naruto didn't need Jiraiya's help. Naruto controlled his smile and said, "Then I will gladly help you, but only because of two reasons." He raised a finger, "Because my friend and I also live on this planet. If it's destroyed, then we will have nowhere else to go." He added a second finger, "And because it'll be fun," Yamato hastily said, "and no holding back." Naruto made a flippant hand gesture at him. "Let me worry about that." He then rubbed his hands together in anticipation. "Now where do I start?" Kakashi nudged Sakura forward and she blushed under Naruto's curious gaze. "There are these plant-like men that are giving us trouble. We don't know their weakness." Naruto motioned for her to continue as he began trekking to the mountain. The others followed him. "We know that when they take a blood sample of a living or dead shinobi, they are able to take their form and infiltrate our ranks. The only way we're to know that they are posing as a comrade is that they had a zigzag-like marking going down from their chests to their pelvis. Even the eyes don't change?" the scientist asked, intrigued by the creature's ability. "No, they seem to be able to place a chakra-less illusion over them," the star medic of the team continued. "What are their key components?" Naruto summoned 4 spiders and they began their ascent upwards. They met up with Aoki-chan and she turned around. The Konoha ninjas each got out slightly older versions of oxygen masks that Anbu use, white fibrous skin, a greenish sap in their chest cavity that is imbued with nature chakra, and our sensors say that there is another chakra signature on them, that this chakra comes off as watered down and weak from age. The pink-haired medic was on the same spider as Naruto, but she still had to yell over the high-speed winds blowing around that. Naruto hummed and nodded. "I'm under the assumption that you have a sample readily available on you." "Yes, we recovered a whole plant body from a battle in Waterfall." "You did? How have you been able to kill it so far?" "Knife to the heart, but that alone is incredibly difficult because they can heal themselves and stand up again. We need to make the wound deep and large so that most of the sap would leak out." Sai yelled to Naruto. He had been feeling left out of the conversation. Naruto looked at Sakura and she nodded to confirm what she said. He looked back up the mountain as his spider scampered to the cave. "I think I know how to kill these things from a distance, but I need to get that sample to my lab and analyze it to confirm." His Ronin friend waved for his attention and he mentally commanded the spider she was on to approach his speeding stead. Both racing side by side, someone broke into the lab. "Sir." She discreetly signed to him and his eyebrows shot up in surprise and she nodded before hesitating for a few seconds. They took your godmother's DNA." "They did what?" He didn't even wait for the spiders to slow down in front of the cave before he jumped off, slapped his palm on the door and pushed it open. The lab looked unchanged, but he knew better. He ran to his desk and saw that documents he stored on it had been pushed off to the ground, scattered everywhere. His shaking hands ran over the surface of the table and ever so slowly a fractured storage seal that spanned over the whole table opened up. Fractured because it had been forced open by a counter seal greater than level 6. Nothing was unsealed since it was empty. Among the many things Orochimaru wanted him to do on the event of her death was to find a cure for her unique heart cancer. He was just about to get to it until the Konoha ninjas came. It was the only physical sample on the planet because the body he had buried had been burnt to ash, again at her request. He fell on one knee and closed his eyes forcefully, trying to force the tears that wanted to come out to stop. The Konoha ninjas looked at him, not knowing what happened, and Aoki-chan hastily walked to him and blocked him from view with her new attire. A long white coat that reached her mid-calf. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and his head snapped to her, fire spinning in his vulpine eyes that were hidden under his black goggles. She handed him a small handheld device with a glass screen and her thumb tapped the center so the surveillance video would begin playing. A spinning vortex similar to the one he saw the Uchiha used to escape appear inside the cave, just behind the door. The man stumbled and fell on his knees, visibly in pain from the slice wound through his right arm that cut clean through it enough to chip into his bone. He stayed on his knees, panting for air and clasping the profusely bleeding wound with his other hand. The man cursed under his breath and looked up from his kneeling position at the pristine lab. Besides the spurts of blood that pumped out of his arm and pooled at his feet, the toxins laced in the blade were destroying him. He grumbled, his voice sounding gurgled, and his Sharingan eye looked around for a source of chakra that wasn't nature, Naruto's, Aoki-chan's or Kyuubi's. There were storage seals all around the lab and only 2 in each room, as far as his eyes could see from his hunched position, but the one that stood out was the one located on the desk. He struggled to his feet, grunting with each steady step, and stopped by the desk. He suppressed the pain the toxins were putting him through to draw a counter seal for the storage seal with his blood. There was an audible crack in the glass cylinder that stored flax of the dead Sannin's skin. He swiped the sample and stuffed it into his cloak before he Kamui teleported out of the lab. Naruto pushed the video device away and took his female friend's head to stand up. He looked over his shoulder at his Konoha shinobi guests with a sinister smirk. It seems I do have a reason to go all out. Are you aware that he will kill you for doing this? Orochimaru the Snake Sannin said with an amused smirk to the one-armed Obito Uchiha and her former apprentice, Yakushi Kabuto. She looked disapprovingly at the latter. I'm very disappointed in you, Kabuto-kun. The Sannin honestly felt great. She was not in any pain. The pale woman looked around at the location she had been revived and saw that it was a cave with the walls smoothened out so that they all curved and touched at the top. Around her were hundreds of closed caskets, but from the ones that were open she was able to recognize 3 legendary figures: Hashirama Senju, Mu of the Dust Release, and Uchiha Madara. The real Uchiha Madara. He had his arms closed and his awe-inspiring 3-tomo Sharingan looked down on her. She wasn't able to move, a sign that her apprentice had perfected the impure world resurrection jutsu and was simply keeping them rigid with his mind. With a heavy mind she realized that the war her former organization, the Akatsuki, wanted to start had already started the war. Though one thing made her yellow eyes brighten: none of you stand a chance against my Naruto-chan. She growled under her breath and flashed a bright grin at the one-armed Uchiha. I take it he did that to you. She tutted lowly, to shame him. Can you even imagine what else he can do if he puts in a little effort? She didn't know he had recreated an entire town in 6 hours, but that was a point proven. You all are dead men walking. When he finds out I was brought back. Shut up, Madara intoned. His voice bounced around the large subterranean room. The snake woman opened her mouth to curse at the Uchiha, but Kabuto mentally forced her mouth shut. She turned to him and spat venom through her eyes. The snake boy recoiled a little. Get on with the plan, Obito. Even though he couldn't move, his presence was still felt, and it only seemed Hashirama wasn't affected. The wood release user looked at the man from the corner of his eyes, seeing as he couldn't turn his head to look at him. What plan? The reptilian teen looked away from her to his partner, Obito. Yes, what plan? Tell her to summon the Uzumaki king of the underworld mask. Why? The one-armed Uchiha glared at the medic, and he clearly got the message. He nodded to his former sensei-turned-undead puppet, and she rigidly weaved through 100 hand seals, struggling with all her might to slow her hands down, but Kabuto had full control of her, merely with an idle thought, and she finished the set of seals by clapping her hands together and interlacing them, summoning Jutsu. Uzumaki king of the underworld mask. A thick crack broke a foot in front of her and it widened. Out of the crack rose multiple skeleton hands, each one supporting a corner of an average-sized mask that bore the seal of the Underworld King on its forehead. It was designed in a way that it had ringed eyes of a raccoon and fangs of a vampire, pale white as the moon. The Sannin ripped the mask from the skeleton's hands and they returned to the underworld. She shakily handed it to her former apprentice. There was a reason the Uzumaki were so feared, not only because of their chakra, or their battle lust, or their kenjutsu skills. They were feared because of their fuinjutsu skills. They were among the oldest clan in history, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that they were able to use seals to tap into the realm of the undead. The Uzumaki king of the underworld mask was created to temporarily revive dead comrades to return to battle, but the power of the mask soon took over its user and corrupted him. He had to be put down before he could do something evil, and the mask had been stored, not in Uzushio, but deep under the marshes of swamp country. Orochimaru had stolen the mask in the hopes of using it to bring back her baby brother, Minato, so that she could at least apologize to him. But the day she found it was also the day she had gotten news of Naruto's existence. She dropped everything she was doing, her life and her duties, to take care of her godchild for as long as she could, forgetting about the mask. Until today, the sacrifice needed to flawlessly use the mask was of a person who had frequently escaped death, or a person the king of hell would gratefully snag. Obito took the mask from Kabuto, and that was when pain, specifically the Asura path, made his appearance, dragging the limp body of Shimura Danzo. The man had made the mistake of sending his root ninjas to him in order to make a deal, Danzo's Sharingan, for safety during the war. The old war hawk actually believed that Obito had one eye because he couldn't get a replacement. The Uchiha clearly didn't want to make any deals and effortlessly destroyed Root, sparing Danzo so that he would serve a purpose, which was to be the sacrifice to bring Madara back to life. The one-armed Uchiha, who was one-armed because he had cut off his poisoned arm before the poison spread to his heart, put on the mask. Pain held Danzo up so that he could face Madara, and the ancient Uchiha wore an evil smirk of victory as his disciple pointed his index and middle finger at Danzo. The color on his skin began to drain, and swiped it to his master. There was a visible vortex of translucent white that passed from Danzo into him, for about 5 minutes before it stopped, with Danzo being nothing but a pile of bones. The mask crumbled from Obito's face, and every living member in the room took a cautious step back as Uchiha Madara walked forward. The revived man slowly looked at his one-armed disciple, then to the frantic reptilian teen that formerly had control of him, then to the path that represented Nagato. He smirked at the latter. His power rolled off him in dangerous waves, enough to make the erect coffins around them to creak away from him. His bone-chilling eyes not hiding his intention for the world as the stilled Tomo analyzed each resurrected coffin, not even needing to open them. He began walking through the sea of standing caskets to the exit, situated under the Valley of End, and said, "We attack Konoha first, after which we begin phase 2 of my plan. No one would stand in my way." Orochimaru closed her eyes. Good luck, Naruto. Chapter 8. 9 a.m. Allied Shinobi Forces Headquarters. Hidden Waterfall Village. Naruto kicked open the door and was immediately surrounded by at least 30 ninjas. All of them were wielding an array of weapons, or at least had their fists up, and were in rigid fighting stances. Behind the spider summoner his samurai friend sighed tiredly. Naruto bravely walked forward, pulling Aoki-chan with him by her left hand, and glared up when a shinobi at least 2 feet taller than him blocked his path to his target. "Lord Shibuki, can you call off your dogs?" Naruto shouted around the person blocking him. "Or I'll have to go through them just to talk to you." He felt his hand being tugged and he spared a quick eye over his shoulder, looking at his guard's solid gaze, then back again. He grumbled, I would like to discuss something with you." His eyebrows twitched with irritation as he added, "Please, I don't know how you got past our defenses, I don't know how you got past my shinobi, and I don't know how you broke through our ranks to get to this building." Shibuki, leader of Waterfall Village, began as he waved for his shinobi, as well as the other allied ninjas, to stand down. He walked around the command table, with Mei and Tsunade following suit, to stand in front of the teenager. Aoki-chan bowed deeply to the village leaders and they acknowledged it with curt nods, though Naruto didn't follow her example. "But right now I don't care. I heard you were looking for me," Naruto said while looking straight at Tsunade and fixing his goggles better with a sharp smirk. "Well, here I am." The blonde Senju frowned darkly at Naruto. "I'm tempted to have you arrested here and now." Naruto scoffed and had to be pulled back by his Ronin best friend so that he wouldn't physically butt heads with the Hokage. "We both know I won't go down without a fight." It was hard to explain, but there were a few people that by just looking at Naruto would get infuriate him. Jiraiya, Kakashi and Tsunade were those few people. Tsunade crossed her arms strongly and lifted her chin up. "That won't need to happen, we need your help." She looked around him, seeing as she wasn't tall enough to look over his shoulder, even though she was a relatively tall kunoichi, and spied the group of Konoha ninjas outside of the circle of ninjas surrounding them. Her eyes returned to the younger ninja. I take it Team 7 informed you of your purpose. They have. Then you can begin as soon as possible. She said and made to turn around, but stopped when Naruto laughed under his breath. The blonde boy lightly jabbed his elbow to the girl holding his hand and nodded to Tsunade. She thinks she can command me, that's hilarious, he hollered and was about to rush forward to the woman again, if not for his hand being hurriedly pulled back. Naruto snarled evilly at Tsunade, who took a step back at the abruptness of his faltered attack. One moment he was a blur, the next he was back normal in the same spot. The spider summoner bared his teeth and lowly toned. You don't tell me, Lady Tsunade. The senju covered the gulp that built up in her throat and tried to keep her eyes leveled with the cold blackness of the goggles from the S-ranked Uzumaki. Because I agreed to help in this war does not mean you can issue commands to me like I'm one of your shinobi. I work on my own terms and at my own time, and if I see it fit I would kill one Akatsuki member a month. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was yanked back again and his expression twisted with irritation when the woman remained unmoving. He cracked his neck and the sound of it echoed through the deathly silent building. Tsunade nodded slightly and Naruto's face bloomed into a smile. That's the spirit. Now, before I can render my services I have a few conditions I want this esteemed gathering of leaders to agree on. He slapped his forehead when he remembered something. He turned to Mei and waved. How's the war treating you, Lady Mei? The Mizukage shrugged tiredly. Not too good, Lord Naruto. The Uzumaki hummed and scratched his chin. I see, his hidden red eyes roved back to the Hokage and he continued. Do you want to hear my conditions or are you desperate enough to agree right away? Let's hear them, she grated. First I want full immunity for our crimes and I want our names to be wiped off the missing ninja, Ronin list of our respective villages. He said this as he motioned to Aoki-chan. Mei and Shibuki were all for it but Tsunade was hesitant. What Naruto did during his time as a Konoha ninja and even after that were abominable, disgusting acts of inhuman depravity. He was wanted in more than a dozen countries and his name was hot on the lips of everyone, not only because of his KDC empire but for his infamy as well. Naruto added, our names can still be in bingo books but not as rogue fighters. We need to deliberate on this with the others. We can't just jump into these kinds of decisions without everyone being present. The Hokage said with a hint of pleading in her voice. Naruto's eyebrows went down, showing that he was squinting at her, and she hurriedly said. What are your other conditions? She hoped upon hope that he wouldn't ask for money. Naruto was rich. Money didn't really motivate him anymore, so she could rest easy that he wouldn't ask her for money. That the Kitsugami Drug Company be recognized as a legal organization and that interference from countries we're based in, he again motioned between his friend and him. Should be stopped completely. We will provide drugs and all but no attacking my workers. We will also table that in our discussion. The Kage, Tsuchikage and Raikage were fighting at the warfronts close to their villages and were to return back to the HQ in a few hours. The Hokage and the Mizukage weren't in their respective villages because there wasn't an immediate need for them. Naruto conceded and said, lastly I want Konoha, and all of Fire Country, to leave me alone. I can travel in Fire Country and I can even visit Konoha when I want but I don't want leaf ninjas randomly jumping me. Aoki-chan's getting bored killing them. This time the usually gentle Ronin beamed with him. That last one I can personally handle. Tsunade ensured and Naruto nodded for her to continue when he noticed that she still had something to say. But, yes, he shared a short look with his friend. I think it would be best if you do something before we can consider your conditions. A certainty that you will pull through on your side. I see where you're going. You want me to prove myself. Exactly. The woman nodded and Shibuki spoke. There are 13 main players in the opposing forces. Sasori, Deidara, Kisame, Kabuto Yakushi, Uchiha Madara, a paper jutsu user, the 6 Rinnegan holders and the plant man. I propose that to prove yourself you kill any 5 of them first. This is the Sandame's challenge all over again. Naruto thought with a roll of his eyes. He was again being placed in an impossible situation with a monumental amount of load placed on his shoulders, on a mission with no room for mistakes. It was all miraculously coming full circle again but unlike back then, when he was just getting the hang of doing the impossible, he was older. He could handle it. Anyone in particular? If I may, Mei said, injecting herself into the conversation. I suggest Lord Naruto kill Sasori, Deidara, Kisame, Kabuto and Madara. If those 5 fall, then the rest would be easy to pick off. You forgot about the plant man. He seems to be a key player, and he needs to be handled quickly. The blonde muttered to himself but nodded. Fine, but as long as Aoki-chan here gets to deal with Kisame, for some reason she wants him dead. He shrugged laxly, like it was normal for his well-mannered samurai friend to want another person's head rolling so insistently. The leaders nodded immediately and Naruto slowly stuck his hands into his front right pants pocket, not to make the ninjas jump, and pulled out a small clear file with light green contents. Dip your weapons in this, preferably your long-range weapons, and use them on to attack the plant clones. One touch and they would crumble like rubble. The boy smiled widely at his rhyme, which wasn't really a rhyme. Chakra was and would always be the weakness for any organic living creature, human, animal or otherwise. When an attack was made directly to the chakra, and it succeeded, then there was little to no hope for the victim. The attacks could range from severe infections to simply forcefully injecting foreign chakra into the target system, a simplified version of genjutsu. When capitalized well, then the person would stand no chance, which was exactly what Naruto brought forward in the small vial he had cooked up in his lab. He had quickly studied the greenish sap in the plant imposters and noted that it was purely liquid nature chakra, something only seen from trees and shrubs but engineered in such a way that instead of simply solidifying when it left the chest cavity it stayed liquid. So Naruto created a sort of solidifying agent that made use of nature chakra from his snakes. The foreign chakra would negatively react with the plant man and they would turn to stone, as was the norm when nature chakra was tampered with by an organic being. The thin liquid had no effect on humans, merely giving the person a small rash on where the liquid came in contact with that would reduce in half an hour, and this was what Naruto detailed to the ninjas. Even a drop of this would take down even the biggest plant clone. He tossed the small container to Tsunade, in case she wanted examined before she used it. There's more with your apprentice. He jabbed his thumb over his shoulder to the pink-haired medic before he waved. I'll be going now. He turned and said over his shoulder. And I almost forgot. If my conditions aren't met after this war is over, then I would kill all of you leaders, starting with you, Lady Tsunade. Have a nice day. He allowed the gravity of his words reach them as he left Hidden Waterfall. Outside the village we find Naruto checking his attire while his nervous bodyguard looked on. The Uzumaki was in a gray and red hoodie, which he pulled up over his head to cast a shadow over his upper face. There was a short-sleeved red shirt underneath it. He was also in black pant, with bandages tied around his feet and his toes, which were in a pair of gray shinobi sandals. The boy sat down on a rock and clipped on his silver senbon launchers. He wavered in place, trying to decide whether or not to wear the curved black stealth guards. He decided not to, seeing as even if he did they wouldn't hide him in broad daylight. He adjusted his feet bandages and idly said, "Is there something wrong?" Aoki-chan stopped pacing around the small clearing and stood in front of Naruto. I insist I come along with you. You've got Kisame to kill, remember? We can kill him last. If we spread out, then we can cover more ground. You're going after 5S ranked ninjas. She yelled, scaring away a flock of birds that nested in a cluster of trees close by. He raised an eyebrow and sat up, perching his hands to his side on the rock. He stared at her for a few long minutes, with her ragged panting and her clenching and unclenching fingers. He instinctively looked over her to see whether she was in her full gear, a white and red midriff shirt, exposing a smooth tanned stomach covered by black mesh armor. She was in deep red shorts that stopped at her mid-thigh, with a black sash around her waist, which was where her sword was safely perched in, and black knee socks traveling down into black sandals. Over her torso was a light black coat with a stitched Spider Clan badge on the left breast that she left open, and crossed over her body was her bow, with her arrows stored in a quiver on her back. His eyes slowly crept up from her body to her coal-black eyes and he cocked his head to the side curiously. You don't have anything to worry about, not this time, Naruto. She halted what he was going to say. This time you're diving head first against 5S ranks. I have the right to worry. Naruto's lips twitched upwards into a small smile and he smoothly got to his feet, easily taller than her. He pulled down his hoodie and lifted up his goggles to look into her eyes with his own. The blonde slowly placed his right hand on her shoulder and his other hand on her head, smoothing down her neat black hair and tucking a strand behind her ear. The Ronin was trying not to cry. She firmly pursed her lips and tightly closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking at her sides and Naruto slowly smiled. Silently, he ghosted his fingers over her reddening cheeks and she looked up at him. He tried not to frown at the tears she kept at bay. "I'll be fine." She looked into his terror-inspiring eyes unflinchingly before her own dropped. Her hands gently went up to his and she clasped them strongly, holding them between their bodies, making her realize that they were standing embarrassingly close. She gulped lightly and whispered, "What if you won't?" He reached back to his head, her hands followed since they were in his grasp, and he removed his goggles. He fixed them over her forehead and smirked sharply at her astonished expression as he neatly smoothed down her black hair. How about that? Naruto's goggles were the first ever things he got from his godmother, Orochimaru of the Sannin. They were his most precious treasures and he would preferably travel to hell, dine with the devil, stay for a few years and return back to earth than lose them. And the implication of what this was not lost to the black-haired girl. Naruto had basically given her his heart and his soul. Aoki-chan felt heat rise up from her belly and take over her face. She bit her black painted bottom lip nervously and shyly looked down, allowing her hair to shadow her burning face. Naruto laughed and playfully bopped her nose. She puffed out her cheeks stubbornly and he gave her hair a last ruffle before he disentangled his fingers from hers. "Don't forget we have that birthday date in a few weeks." She perked up and Naruto beamed when her face glowed, the tears already gone. "Yeah, you promised." The blonde nodded and walked past her, flipping on his hoodie, throwing a shadow over his face once again, though this time his horrifying vulpine red shone from the darkness. He made sure his launchers were under his hoodie's sleeves, with the 4 main nozzles barely poking out from underneath. "I certainly did." And he leapt away towards where he had heard Sasori and Deidara were last seen. 2 hours later, the deserts close to Sanagakure. Wind country. "This is boring," Deidara yelled to the sky. Sasori didn't even spare the blonde bomber a glance. The duo was flying on a clay bird towards Suna to, once again, rain destruction and disorder in hidden sand. It was becoming much too repetitive for them, nothing Sasori couldn't handle. But Deidara's whining was slowly getting on his nerves. The wooden man, sitting securely in his solid Hiriko puppet, mentally grated as the bomber hissed and spat like a child. Admittedly, Deidara was right. This war was boring. There was no challenge for the remaining Akatsuki and it was pretty much smooth sailing to oblivion. But always winning got tiresome really quickly. The puppet master was immortal. He had all the time in the world to develop himself, but that didn't stop him from starting as soon as he got his body. His collection of puppets and human puppets had drastically increased, and there was also the added perk of taking an already dead shinobi and controlling their limbs to his every whim. Unlike his partner, who was only interested in blowing things up because, apparently, art was an explosion. The redhead sneered. "Explosion my A." He stopped and raised his hand for silence. Thankfully Deidara obeyed and shut his mouth. He turned his head around, reminiscent to an owl looking all the way behind him, and his brown eyes remained expressionless as an oncoming plume of dust and sand rushed towards them. Nothing could be seen from the puppet master's face, but he was becoming excited about the prospect of a, hopefully, good fight. The bomber though hooted and commanded his clay bird to circle around the billowing sand when it stopped fully as it got to them. There was a smaller burst of air and the wind was swept away. This time the wooden man's eyes lit up a fraction when he recognized who it was. The killer of Kakuzu, Uzumaki Naruto. The boy had a red bandana covering his mouth and nose, tucked neatly so that his hoodie covered the knot tied behind his neck, and if they didn't see the bright red eyes of evil spark from the dark recesses of the hoodie they wouldn't have known it was him. Another obvious sign that it was Naruto was his signature black backpack and the small glinting nozzles slightly popping out from his sleeves. They were his senbon launchers. The boy silently followed them with his red eyes as they circled around him on the bird. Deidara squealed childishly and yelled, "I can't help myself, C3. He fed clumps of clay to his palms and dropped the regurgitated mass down to Naruto. "Dai namikaze scum, Katsu." He screamed maniacally and Sasori almost cursed him for wasting the kill so quickly, but when, 2 seconds later, there was no subsequent explosion, he looked down. The bomb was gone. Naruto was still looking up at them, analyzing them silently, and when they looked deeper into his eyes they found amusement. This was uncharacteristic behavior for the spider summoner. Reports of those that had encountered him always spoke of how much he laughed and toyed with them, always grinning and nearly always tittering evilly. Now though, he was just standing there, doing nothing but looking at them. S-rank my ass. Naruto mumbled when they duo distractedly followed his diversion, still circling him cautiously on their clay bird. The boy slowly brought up both of his hands, palm up and to his sides, and snapped his fingers. That was when purple-tipped senbon of death rained down from heaven in a glorious shower of light, covering over a 5-mile radius of the desert from the point Naruto stood. Too far away for a body flicker technique to successfully escape and too far for the clay bird to quickly fly from. The two S-ranks looked up in sync at the sudden large, thick cloud of medical needles Naruto had been creating since his unexpected appearance. The teen had summoned 10 shadow clones and had them spread out in a large circle, exactly 5 miles with him at the center, and they were given the duty of creating the storm of poison-tipped senbon. Senbon thunderstorm. Naruto intoned with a large smile on his face, hidden beneath his mouth bandana. He didn't even wince as a few of the needles impaled his body. At that point he was immune to his own poison. The flying bird and the two ninjas standing on it were mercilessly punctured by the pouring oozing senbon needles. The bird crashed into the sand with a ground-shaking thump and there was a small, suppressed explosion which sounded more like a low pop than an earth-shattering bang. Naruto guessed that it was because the tissue-destroying poison laced on the tips of his patented needles had charred through the clay bird so much that it was nothing more than a burnt, slightly curved surface. He allowed the needles to continue falling from heaven from thick purple clouds gathered overhead until he ordered for it to stop 5 minutes after it had started. The thin goo on the needles scattered around melted and slithered the ground harmlessly, though the ones eating Deidara and Sasori entered their chakra networks and wreaked terrible havoc. He dusted his shoulders of the few needles that melted on his body and they dissolved into an odorless, colorless liquid. Naruto then started trekking leisurely towards the smoky remains of the two S-ranks, his hands in his pockets and his lips pursed at the foul odor that wafted off the debris, a negative effect of using his tissue-eroding poison. He briefly looked over Sasori and cocked his head to the side slightly before he looked at the Mad Bomber's lifeless carcass. He bent down on one knee and placed his pointer and middle fingers on the quickly rotting flesh of the ninja, all the while holding his breath so he wouldn't have to inhale the foul odor. A small, slow smirk grew on his face when he realized something, after feeling a small pulse on the ninja when there was meant to be no pulse. Hell, even Sasori wasn't saved and he wasn't even human anymore. Deidara's eyes flashed open and he madly grinned at Naruto. Meeting Naruto's scary red vulpine eyes, the younger blonde opened his mouth and muttered with amusement dancing in his eyes and vague respect flowing through the orbs as well. Ah! Deidara cackled wildly and screamed, "Katsu!" And the suicide bomb clone exploded with a magnitude strong enough to destroy an entire major hidden village. Sanagakure no Sato. Everybody take cover, earth release, mud wall. The bandage-swaddled former sensei to the sand siblings yelled and erected a wall of mud in sync with other Sunajunin to cover a large section of the village. There were massive clumps of earth falling from the sky and the sky itself even seemed to have acknowledged the magnitude of the explosion. The blue sky had been taken over by light red clouds and the slight wind that blew stopped abruptly. The ninjas grunted in effort as the earth smashed against their shields. The gathered civilians that weren't quick enough to enter the village's bunkers shivered and hugged each other in fear, watching in horror through the cracks as the sky burst into blinding light and even the earth itself seemed to groan under the strain of the blast. The shockwave hit them and nearly half of the shinobi holding the walls were thrown to the ground, destroying their concentration and shattering the defenses. Baki roared in effort and forced 3 seal-less sand clones to burst from the ground and kick aside the rocks that threatened to flatten the helpless civilians and the shocked shinobi. The weight of the rocks falling down from the sky was getting too much, even for the veteran ninjas. They all breathed a sigh of relief when 6 giant arms of sand, erupting straight from the ground around Suna, swept aside the rocks covering their walls, then raised their palms to the sky, palms facing the red clouds weeping rocks and debris, and deftly held strong against the other rocks. They could just barely spy their case cage standing on a flying mass of sand, his hand in the air controlling the colossal arms of sand. His eyes were zeroed in on the source of the blast. Maniacal laughing echoed through the vaguely dusty area where the almighty bomb had imploded. The mad bomber slowly rose from the ground, his combat garb in ruins, so he tore it off and threw it away, leaving him in a black fishneck vest and brown pants with black sandals. His deranged eyes searched around for the blonde and quickly shot to his right before he looked away as his puppet partner reassembled his body parts from the sand. His heart sealed the main point they were meeting, until his whole body had been formed again. Half of his red hair had been seared off by the blast and his left arm was broken beyond compare. So he threw it off and small blue tendrils slithered out of his burnt sleeve and lifted the left arm of his destroyed Ichiraku puppet from the sand, connected it back, and he experimentally flexed his fingers. His brown eyes carefully searched for the young blonde ninja. "Where are you, shit-faced motherfucker?" Deidara yelled unrestrained and began forcing clay into his handmouths in preparation. Both S-ranks whirled towards a small spike in chakra more than 20 feet away from them and watched as Naruto's body began reforming, slowly and carefully, by multicolored spiders as large as an average man's hands. Half of his body didn't seem to have any form, just a writhing pile of wiggling spiders clambering over each other to form their master, and the other part was steadily getting to his feet. Part of Naruto's face had not yet been recreated, but it did not reduce the intimidation factor that he was even capable of surviving a blast of that strength. "I'm impressed," the blonde said. His hoodie was still fully intact and his bandana was still correctly placed on his mouth, but despite all of this they could notice that the boy had to place a bit of effort in escaping the evaporating blast. They could also sense the wide grin on Naruto's face as the spiders ran up and down his body, forming his right torso and his right shoulder. The boy raised his unformed left hand, a mere pile of moving creatures, and wiggled his fingers. The spiders ran to the tips of his hands and melded together to make his body. Ever so carefully his whole arm was made and his shoulder was reconstructed. "I would have been greatly disappointed if my needle storm killed you, but thankfully I still get a chance to have fun." The eight-legged summons at his legs quivered and locked their limbs and teeth together, constructing his upper thigh and his hips, leaving his right leg as a pool of spiders. The teen looked down at the unformed mass with a raised eyebrow and the spiders in turn hurriedly skittered around, finally making his legs. The two ninjas watched the display partly in awe, partly in horror. No doubt he had been taught that particular trick by Orochimaru, seeing as the Sannin used the body dispersion jutsu with her snakes when situations go sticky. Naruto idly dusted his right shoulder, shaking off the dust that had been there. There was always an advantage of having these kind of small spiders in his arsenal. When he had felt for a pulse on Deidara's neck and found out that it was a ticking bomb instead of a heart, he immediately destabilized his body. A split second before the explosion vaporized him, or at least maimed him beyond recognition, he had the spiders switch with the scattered needles all around, as far as possible, before they dig into the ground and took cover deep in the sand. He made use of an evolved version of the desert duster, the fastest species in the desert, and even at the moment he could feel a few summons in Suna dispersing. Yes, he had mastered the body reformation technique and he could do it much faster than he had done, but there was always the intimidation factor he liked to use on his targets. He liked putting on a show of power without actually attacking them so that they see how useless an attack on him could be. If he succeeded, then he had already won the fight. He met Deidara's mad gaze unflinchingly and said, "Now, I'm not interested on how you dodged my storm, I just want to know what your bloodlines would do when White Sage Snake eats your dead bodies." Confident words for a child that barely dodged death. Naruto shrugged. "I just wanted to see if you were worth any effort." And sent them a condescending look, something that boiled Sasori up inside. "You're not, you're even worse than that Sharingan user. I didn't even think that was possible." The mad bomber shook in rage and thrust his palms to Naruto. "I'll make you eat those words, Namikaze." Bird-shaped clay fluttered quickly out of his handmouths to Naruto and the boy thrust his right hand over his shoulder into his backpack and drew the dreaded long sword, the grass-cutter blade. He twirled the poisoned blade in his grip and swung it around his body, resembling more like an art form than an offense defense. He sliced through the birds like butter, slapped a few away with the flat side of his sword and used the sole of his feet to push a few others aside. The blurry white flying birds swooped around Naruto in their dozens, surrounding him and diving down to him, only to get sliced to bits or kicked into oblivion. "Why aren't they blowing up?" Sasori muttered to his partner and Deidara frowned sharply. "I don't know." The blonde tirelessly sliced and cut apart the birds that came to him, The victims of his attacks dropped to the ground in pieces and melted into a pile of bubbling white ooze. Deidara stopped sending birds to their inevitable death to conserve his clay, and Naruto spun his sword in his hands again and flicked it down, sending the last bird spiraling to the sand. "Do you honestly think I won't add a few poisons to my godmother's sword?" he muttered, more to himself, and allowed a drop of thin purple poison to roll down the sharp sides of his weapon and drop onto the ground. It fizzled and bubbled on contact, scorching the sand. Poison and toxins were his specialty, and quite frankly he was offended they thought he didn't have a way to destabilize the structural integrity of clay, bomb or not, with a fast-acting solution. Useless. I would have to do this by myself. Sasori hissed stonily and rolled open a scroll he unsealed from his torso, using a gaping hole in his chest to get there. Red secret technique. Performance of 100 puppets. Sanagakure no Sato. Shouldn't we go and help him? Kankuro wondered aloud to his siblings. They were floating with Gaara on his levitating clump of sand and watching Naruto's fight with the two other S ranks. So far it seemed more one-sided and laid back, on Naruto's part, with the blonde having more ways to negate their attacks than the duo. The performance of 100 puppets was deadly maneuver that the puppet master used, and Kankuro didn't wish for death at their cold, wooden hands. "I do not know Lord Naruto well, but I know better than to assist him in a fight," Gaara said under his breath. He crossed his arms and raised his shaved-off eyebrows when Naruto's shoulders shook slightly, showing that he was chuckling lowly. He settled into a slack kenjutsu fighting stance in preparation for the fight. "Why is that?" Temari asked, at awe that Naruto was not in the least afraid. His associate, Aoki-chan, has advised the leaders of the alliance not to step in to help him. We would only get in the way. "That's unbelievable. No one can face two S ranks alone," Temari said, and was about to leap onto her fan to fly to Gaara, but a firm hand on her forearm stopped her. "Just watch," Gaara commanded and pointed at the battle. One of the last things Orochimaru taught her godson was to passively utilize the animal nature chakra stored in him to enhance his body and his natural senses. Even though the woman had been formed from a snake, she was still 60% human, so she knew exactly what Naruto passed through every time he intended to enhance his senses with his extra eyes and extra nose. A migraine if he kept up the effort for longer than 10 minutes, and a mental blow to knock him unconscious if it went on for 30 minutes, all because of overload of his senses. The Sannin had carefully instructed Naruto on how to separate each eye and each nostril and how to flow through movements like he was truly an incarnate of his primary summons, with the speed and dexterity of his summons. Coupled with the fact that Naruto was partly insane and he was very much impossible to tag him without the help of an advanced dojutsu or the intimate secrets of his fighting style, and so far only his Ronin best friend knew that, and even she found it hard to keep up with him. The spider summoner flowed and moved his body, his long sword whooshing with each swing and casting bright, smoothly following after images as it cut through the air. He lifted his left leg up and smashed his heel against the broad sword of a puppet, pushing it away so that he could swing his own weapon and slice through two other puppets, the corroding poisons laced on the blade making the cutting edge even sharper. Naruto easily drove his right fist, his free hand, through the face of a puppet and used its body to block a barrage of kunai spraying from the mouth of another puppet. He swung his sword and cut through two more oncoming puppets, still holding his motionless wooden shield, and grinned widely, getting more interested as more puppets rained down on him. Sasori watched, mesmerized, as the scientist sliced, hacked and broke his puppets. Each movement wasn't wasted, and each thrust welcomed an opportunity for either a punch, a kick or another thrust, moving much too unpredictably for him to keep track of. Suddenly Naruto's red eyes shone brighter in his hoodie, and the boy simply swished his weapon through the air 5 times, each encircling his body, wildly missing a few puppets, and he flicked a few drops of blood onto the ground, pointing it to the sand and staying in that position. There was silence until crack, the puppet master and the mad bomber felt a sharp, quick change in the air. All the puppets were motionless, the little breeze that blew shifted their robes slightly but not enough to push them. Sasori hesitated to move also, feeling that there was something wrong with how silent it was, before he decided to continue his assault. He forced his will through his blue chakra strings, and as they all moved, barely an inch forward, they all broke apart into equal ribbons, clattering and falling onto the ground uselessly. "How did he?" Sasori muttered quietly, feeling a small tremor run through his dead wooden body, and he hastily suppressed it. Nin Kenjutsu, Snow Leopard Midnight Echolocation, was the quiet reply that came from the blonde Uzumaki. The attack was an attack he had been working on with Aoki-chan to cast an almost invisible extension of his blade multiple times away from him to neutralize enemies of equal strength. It made use of Naruto's abundance in chakra, his control and his extra senses as part spider, while for Aoki-chan she had to make use of a few souls stored in her blade to cast eerie copies of her omniogen away from her body, sort of like clone jutsu but without the clones and only for weapons. The boy bent down slight and shot forward, stepping on the sand lightly and forcing Sasori to use his Ichiraku left arm as a shield as the boy brought down the Kusanagi. He remembered the corrosive poison on the weapon and was able to lean away from it, though Naruto wasn't looking at him again. The boy leveled his Senbon launchers on Deidara, who was again sending birds to him in a last-ditch chance at surprising the spider summoner, and fired numerous finger-length needles, bursting the clay birds messily and having the former Iwa ninja duck away with his hands over his head. Running from the accurate shots coming at him, Naruto saw Sasori quickly bring out a scroll form a storage seal, and he kicked his left leg against the hand, breaking it and throwing the scroll away. Now handless and low on ideas, Sasori unhinged his mouth to fire Senbon at Naruto. Next thing he knew, he was looking straight at the unforgiving sun, spitting only 7 needles to the sky, which returned back to him harmlessly. He heard a quick slicing sound and black clouds surrounded his vision, creeping from the edges and taking over his consciousness until Sasori of the Red Sands gave up the ghost. Naruto pushed the grass cutter deeper into the heart seal and kicked the limp body away from him, allowing the heart seal to remain on his blade but at the base near the hilt. He rolled his neck and snapped his head to the last of the duo, who was shamelessly running away, the desert ground slowing him down but not stopping him from stumbling through, his eyes wide in terror and his breath coming out as reedy gusts of heat. Deidara gasped and his chest jutted out. Ever so slowly a drop of blood crawled out from the corner of his lips and he fell onto his knees weakly. He yelled in pain as the blade was pushed further into his heart, from his back, until the tip shot out from the mouth on his chest, burning the lips pitilessly. The weapon was pushed even more, tortuously slowly, until the very tip grazed over the sand. The scientist silently watched on, intrigued, as the mad bomber's shoulders quivered uncontrollably for a few short seconds. I would have loved to fight for longer, but alas, I have a personal deadline I have to reach. The red-eyed blonde said smoothly. BB bastard, na namikaze? Deidara tried to move his hands but couldn't, no matter how hard he tried. He could feel his own body rebelling against him, his systems failing and alarms blaring in his head. His neck gently slumped forward and his dull eyes stared at the sand. As his heart began melting in his chest, he saw the world light up bright white, then it all blinked off, making him fall headfirst into the cold, unforgiving darkness. His body fell forward onto the sand, off the boy's long sword, and he died with an unfinished swear on his lips. Too bad, Naruto said with a childish pout. I was having so much fun. He spun the sword in his palm and smoothly slid it back into his backpack, like he was sheathing it on his back. Now let's see, he hummed and looked around. He summoned 3 snakes to take back Deidara's body back to the white snake sage and pulled out the heart seal for a few tiny spiders to take to Sagi, the spider elder. Maybe they could have use for them, it would be such a waste to just leave them out in the desert. The scientist screwed his lips to the side and turned around in a full circle. Which direction is Konoha again? An hour later, 10 miles west of Konoha. Fire country. Izumo grunted in pain with each helpless effort he used to drag himself away, clawing at the ground and heaving his limp body forward, away from the man that toyed with his very existence. The Allied forces were now focused in Fire Country. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of Allied shinobi that were fighting undead in various parts of the country, tirelessly trying to seal them away as best as they could. But the fact remained that these undead shinobi were hard to kill, notwithstanding the fact that they were already dead. They were just too many, and they fought with one mind, though from analyzing them a person had to be within a mile at the very center in order to control all the thousands of undead at the very same time, though they still couldn't find the puppet master. The fighting hadn't yet reached Konoha. Every ninja laid down their lives to keep the attackers away, no matter what it took. They had received news that Naruto's poison was neutralizing every plant clone, So much so that the clones weren't considered problems anymore, more like annoying flies that could be swatted away. The undead still posed the greatest problem, especially when there were big names making their appearance. There was a sealing unit to seal away the undead they managed to neutralize, but it always took a big toll on the allied forces. There were always casualties. One undead would take down dozens before it could be sealed. If that went on for long, then the world would end and the undead would rule, with the Kabuto Yukushi, the puppet master, as king of the new world. Izumo crawled up to a tree and his muscles tensed agonizingly as he dragged himself to his feet. He faced his undead aggressor, Hanzo of the Salamander, and bared his blood-painted teeth in defiance. "Take your best shot." The man shook his head sadly and swung his right fist forward to crush the eternal Chunin's head. Izumo closed his eyes and resigned himself to his fate. Kotetsu was critically injured in the hidden medical bay, Konoha division, and the chances of him living were slim. Might as well join his friend in heaven. Kami knows they tried their best. The air shook with electricity and Izumo cracked open his eyes, only to see that the attacking hand of the former Amikage had been sliced off to his elbow. The masked man looked at his chopped-off limb, then to his right forearm on the ground, and then finally to the culprit standing to his right. A child shaded by a red hood, allowing only a few tufts of blonde hair to spill from the sides and evil vulpine red eyes shining from the darkness of the hood. The ninja was obviously young. The man could feel it despite not being able to clearly see the attacker's face and despite also being about the same height as him. And as he wondered how the boy could cut off his arm, so quickly and efficiently might he add, he was answered when the blonde flashed a thin, spindly leg that hooked over his left shoulder, deadly sharp at the tip. It lifted back up and sliced off his other arm before he could retaliate. Naruto swiftly slammed his left fist into the man's gut, making use of a monumental amount of Kyuubi chakra, and the result was his abdomen exploding from behind him in an outstanding display of dust. Another spider leg shot out from behind the blonde's back again, hooking over his shoulder like the first one, and two more erupted from his mid-lower back, curving in to join the rest in facing the former rain leader. The spider legs were about the same length as Sagi's legs, which, quite frankly, was longer than any normal adult was tall, making it very easy for Naruto to firmly hold the masked man down and spin him in a thick, white web that might as well be as strong as titanium. The deceptively strong but thin legs held the man up at Naruto's command and brought him closer to the boy's face. Hanzo could see a devious smirk cross the mysterious boy's face. "I smell snake all over you, Lord Hanzo," Naruto said low enough for the restrained man to hear. The mutated human spider lifted up his hands, his right pointer finger placed on Hanzo's forehead and the other in a half-ramhand seal. "Where are you, Kabuto?" he asked, more to himself than to anybody, and even at the dead cage's silent struggles the spider legs, sprouted from the boy's back and shoulder blades, held on strong as Naruto absorbed only a drop of the residue of Kabuto's chakra. He separated the strain of chakra and smelt the nature chakra from it, tracing it right back to the shocked snake man. "Found you," Naruto said with a wide grin, and another pair of spider legs burst from his lower back, over his pelvis, and these legs aided him in carrying the wrapped-up body of the former rain leader with the two legs from his mid-lower back. Without looking back, he shot a single needle to the grievously injured gatekeeper's neck, and Izumo immediately slumped bonelessly against the tree. "You'll be fine." And he leapt into the tree line, leaving the unconscious body of the Chunin behind but also leaving a hand-sized spider to guard his body, just to be on the safe side. The boy moved with the speed of a shadowy red blur, falling down on unsuspecting undead shinobi, spinning them securely in chakra-draining spider webs and leaving before those he had helped could get a firm grasp on his body, but they all knew who he was. You had to be deaf to not hear the haunting cackling that followed the boy like a malevolent ghost. You had to be blind to not see the residue of the webs evaporate into the air from the projectiles he overshot. You had to have a very bad memory to not recognize his chakra. One moment Konoha ninjas were squaring off against undead, fighting with their last breed, and then the next there was a small red blur of speed that descended onto their opponent, wrapped him up in blaringly white webs and flipped off into the tree line, the reincarnated ninja unable to escape from the web. After he had gone, leaving only a thin web string in his wake, there was loud, violent crashing following after him. Trees broke, the ground rumbled, as an entire web ball of writhing undead ninjas rolled after the red spider, carving a path through the ground from its sheer increasing size, with each addition, and with the weight of holding the ninjas in them. The ninjas he had bailed out hastily had to get out of the way, or else they would turn into bloody smears from being crushed by the web ball of undead shinobi. Naruto crash landed on the Hokage's tower, and with an almighty yank he pulled the humongous bag of writhing humanity with him. The bag dropped down and he caught it in both of his hands raised overhead, and to show the ninjas fighting around, especially those that he had helped, of his presence. Those looking up at him could only see a humanoid creature with 6 spider legs sprouting from his back, holding up a massive white web ball that obviously held undead shinobi, with a few of them groaning piteously from the sides and the bag rumbling ever so slightly. They could see a white beam spread over his hidden face, and he yelled, "I need someone to seal these guys." That drew them out of their daze. Over 6 ninjas of the sealing unit sped out from their stations, and Naruto threw the web ball, casting it over the walls of the village and crashing into a cluster of trees, though the web ball held on strongly. A final pair of spider legs grew from slightly under his lower back but still a bit over his pelvis, and 4 spider legs, the 2 found on his lower back, hefted him off his feet effortlessly, and he skittered around the roof of the Hokage's tower. The boy clicked around briefly until he found the massive window overlooking the building leading directly to the Hokage's office. As he got his feet back under him in Tsunade's office, he batted aside 2 white snakes that were thrown at him by the snake summoner, sending over a mental apology to the snakes as they heavily hit the wall and dispersed. "I really hope that wasn't the best you could do, Kabuto," he said, clicking his extra limbs on the ground as he slowly stalked to the scaly white bespectacled man. Kabuto gave a feral hiss, revealing his needle-sharp canines and spitting out acid at the boy, which Naruto had to roll aside for. The green venom the medic spat out sizzled as it hit the wooden door of the cage's office. "I've been waiting for this opportunity for so long," he thought out loud, and Naruto raised an interested eyebrow. "Have you now?" "Yes, and I will make my mistress watch as I kill you." His head shot to a corner of the room, behind the Hokage's desk, which he had been sitting on, and the pale snake Sannin rigidly marched forward. Naruto's eyebrows lowered and his lips tightened when the woman looked at him. The boy felt his heart thud loudly, banging against his ribs. It increased tempo steadily until his blood began boiling and a haze covered his eyes. His jaw clenched powerfully, grinding his sharp teeth against each other, and his fists closed with enough strength for them to crack. Orochimaru smiled forlornly when she saw her godson go under the small, barely seen change from playful and taunting to Uzumaki battle lust. It wasn't something she could train him to suppress, only he could do that, and now, seeing as Kabuto had touched a very delicate nerve, the boy didn't bother holding up his pent-up battle lust, the one he had suppressed in his battle with Sasori and Deidara, the one he had held in when he had gathered the undead shinobi he had passed on his way to Konoha. Naruto had a firm grasp on his emotions, and his self-control was equal to the snake Sannin's, but there were few lines people crossed that he didn't bother holding himself back against. First was stealing from him. Second was hurting his friends, particularly Aoki-chan. Third was hurting his family, specifically Orochimaru. Fourth was undermining him. The last was doing all top 4 at the very same time. And Kabuto had done just that. Few saw Naruto in this side, just about to go feral. The A-rank Ronin saw this the most times, and she was forced not to interfere or else she would lose her head as a result. The boy's victims never survived long enough to warn others. Naruto silently bent down into a new fighting style, a drastically upgraded version of the 4-legged shadow spider fighting style. The 12-legged shadow spider fighting style. "I am going to enjoy tearing you to pieces, Kabuto." Naruto growled under his breath, and Kabuto in turn got into his own fighting style, the shadow snake fighting style, taught to him by the very woman he called mistress. A powerful fighting style in its own right that had been perfected over the years by the very woman that had created it, as well as the first blonde she had ever taught it to, Minato. If used properly, it might be able to hold up against the multiple-legged fighting style. That was a big if. The Forest of Death. Konohagakure no Sato. I still feel he is holding back. Madara hummed in thought as his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spun lazily in his sockets, observing the standoff between Naruto and Kabuto through the Sandame's glass orb. Obito looked at him in bewilderment. "Still? Yes. I cannot see him using any tailed beast chakra or nature chakra. What about those spider legs? Those aren't nature chakra constructs? No, they are part of his body, a result of his mutation I assume. He is now only using his own chakra. Madara said with an excited smirk, briefly looking at the one-armed Uchiha beside him then back to the tense standoff. He is as good as you said he was. Chapter 9. Naruto's vulpine eyes sparkled evilly and he grinned, rising off his feet with his spider appendages and racing headlong to Kabuto, who slithered in a blistering zigzag to the boy. Orochimaru watched, her face stoic but her eyes glazed with emotion. She was proud of her boy. The boy's feet touched back down to the ground and he slammed a forearm into Kabuto's cheek, smashing him clean through the Hokage's desk and slamming into the wall behind it. The force of the blow splintered the floor beneath them, but Naruto didn't care about that. Wearing a large, toothy grin, the boy sped to his dazed opponent, thrusting a palm into Kabuto's chest but grunting in disappointment when all he met was a brick wall as the snake man coiled away from the blow. Naruto yanked his arm out of the wall, sliding away from a mouthful of corrosive venom from Kabuto and using two of his spider appendages to deflect two thrown kunai. The fragile ground creaked dangerously as Naruto got his feet back under him, guarding his chin against a right hook, returning a sharp elbow and huffing when Kabuto planted a hard knee into his gut, but the boy leaned heavily into the strike and unhinged his jaw, snapping down on Kabuto's shoulder with his serrated teeth. Kabuto screamed, his bespectacled eyes wide with horror, and Naruto bit through the other scientist's clavicle, breaking through it with incredible bite force and feeding out venom from his sharp teeth, before Kabuto dispersed into a mass of angrily hissing white snakes. Naruto covered his face as the snakes struck him, sinking their teeth into his body and covering him with bites. He grated his teeth. The bites hurt but he was immune to any kind of poison his godmother's snakes could pump into his system, purposely poisoning himself for years to reach his stage of immunity. He sent another mental apology to the snakes and his spider limbs shredded them off him, turning around and sweeping his eyes around the Hokage's office, looking for Kabuto. His burning red stare met his godmother's and the woman, nonverbal, winked at him. A smirk grew on the boy's bloody lips and he clapped his hands together. He focused into his other eyes, the four dots over his eyebrows, and Kabuto surged out from his back, leading with a clawed fist, but Naruto swept aside from the blow and scattered into a fluttery of hurried spiders when another Kabuto dropped from above him, landing squarely on the mass of small, black spiders. The spiders skittered up Kabuto's legs but the man dispersed, revealed to be a shadow clone. Naruto's head and shoulders reformed from the cluster of spiders, which rose upright till they were at the boy's normal height and exuded killer intent. Kabuto heaved, clutching the bleeding bite mark on his right shoulder, healing it. Through his extra eyes, the dots over his eyebrows, Naruto could see the internal war Kabuto's sage chakra was waging against his venom, and he chuckled, sprinting to his wavering opponent. The image of his bloody mouth beaming garishly and running to claim Kabuto's head drove a harsh shudder down Kabuto's spine, fixing on the spot under Naruto's cloud of killer intent. Naruto laughed at Kabuto's terror, planting an elbow into the bridge of Kabuto's nose, spitting a line of tough spiderwebs from his mouth and catching his opponent before he could blast through the brick wall, reeling Kabuto back to him with a yank and sending the man whirling with a punch to the nose, bouncing him back and forth 3 more times. The boy then flung his head upward and the spiderweb connected to Kabuto's chest hurled him into the air. Naruto leapt up from the ground and caught Kabuto's neck in his right hand, spiraling around and choke slamming him onto the uneven floor, and the floor gave way. The two fighters fell through 2 more floors, Kabuto's neck and back smashing through hard, wooden floors, and Naruto gleefully enjoyed Kabuto's pain, until they got to the ground floor and Kabuto's form dented the tiled ground, creating violent shockwaves that shook Konoha to its foundations. Kabuto hacked a mouthful of blood on Naruto's hand, and Naruto straddled his chest, pinning an arm under a foot and another arm beneath a knee. Naruto's 8 spider legs jammed into the ground and fixed themselves around him. The boy reared his left fist back and clocked Kabuto clean across the face, snarling, forcing another harsh stream of blood from Kabuto's mouth and his neck to brutally snap to the right. And here I thought, Naruto cracked his other fist into Kabuto's other cheek, shaking the earth and driving the people in Konoha into a panic. You give me a challenge. He snapped a punch into Kabuto's face again, shattering the cheekbone. This is a goddamn, he growled, bloodthirstily punching Kabuto's head in another direction. Waste of my time. He swung a punch, meeting Kabuto's temple and forcing him back conscious. Granny's time. He threw another right hook and a mouthful of teeth flew from Kabuto's mouth. And your time. He gripped Kabuto's hair and tugged it up as he brought an elbow down on the broken man's mouth. Do you have any idea? With his other hand, caked with blood and saliva, he tugged Kabuto's head up by his hair and broke him back down with another elbow. What'd I be doing if this nonsensical war wasn't going on? He would be making headway on interdimensional travel. He would be concocting even deadlier poisons. He would be mixing more cures for ailments. He would be setting up more Kitsugami drug company warehouses. He would have time to plan for his date with Aoki-chan. Naruto's red, vulpine eyes shone cruelly and he panted, ragged, gripping Kabuto's collar with his bloodied hand, his right fist at his side. The boy didn't mind his broken knuckles, a smile rising in his eyes as his chakra healed his bones. Kabuto was a ragged, hemorrhaging mess. The medic's sage mode had fallen ages ago and he now resembled a popped boil, leaking red-green liquid with a broken skull, missing teeth and a shredded left eye, where the glass of his spectacles had punctured the eye socket. Believe me when I say you're not worth my time, Kabuto, Naruto hummed, cleaning his knuckles on Kabuto's shirt and standing up, keeping his downed opponent below him. Kabuto closed his eyes with a heavy sigh and Naruto scoffed, smirking as his venom internally burned the man alive. Kabuto's teeth and blood clogged his throat, and his nose had been ripped off by a punch, but he glared defiantly up at the fear-inspiring scientist. I'm almost tempted to test your regeneration. The boy tore out two of his spider limbs from the ground, their tips burning red with Kyuubi chakra, and he shrugged easily, but I've got places to be, people to see. You understand, right? Then Kabuto pulled his last card. Naruto had effectively gathered up all of the reincarnated ninjas in and around Konoha, and the sealing teams were still whittling down the web bag of reincarnated shinobi Naruto had deposited for them some time ago, except for one. Naruto's head tingled and his eyes flicked to the left. Manda, the snake boss summons, spiraled out of nowhere and swallowed Naruto and Kabuto in one bite, storming out of the Hokage's building and smashing through Konoha's southern walls within an instant. Orochimaru, riding on top of her snake, wordlessly ground her teeth. Inside the snake, Naruto's feet couldn't find purchase as he slid down Manda's slimy throat. He spread his spider appendages open and shallowly punctured into the walls of the snake's throat, hovering there and blocking Manda's airways. I don't want to kill you, Manda, Naruto cursed aloud, looking up as the snake's mouth craned open slightly, struggling to breathe as Naruto stuck in his throat, flaring his nose and hissing wildly. Kabuto was slumped under Manda's reptilian tongue, limp and slowly healing. The boy pleaded with his godmother's boss summons, please, don't make me kill you. To think a psychopath could feel remorse. Manda chortled, breathless, slithering over houses and settlements, recklessly breaking through forests and hurtling to the sea. I have no choice, boy. The brat wants to kill us all. Naruto tugged four of his left spider limbs out of Manda's throat and fastened them alongside the four on Naruto's right. The boy skittered up the snake's throat, but Manda dove underwater with his mouth open, flooding his throat with water and washing over Naruto. The boy perched hard against the interior of the summons's throat, baring his teeth against the surge of water, but the force tore him off and whirled him down Manda's throat. Do it, Manda bellowed, descending deeper and deeper into the sea. Do it, now. Bellowing back in a flurry of water, Naruto swore, whipped round and round in a whirlpool inside Manda's gut. He gnashed his teeth and exhaled steam. The jutsu he used next was a quick, humane send-off for the boss summons, at least for someone like Naruto. The boy opened his maw and a tiny black speck grew before his mouth, swelling and expanding rapidly. The boy made sure to balance his chakra with the Kyuubis, roaring as the twister inside the snake's stomach spiraled faster and faster. A shroud of red chakra flickered over Naruto's body, coating his form, growing a pair of fox ears at the top of his head and deepening his whisker marks. The boy's hoodie and backpack withstood the heat and pressure of the Nine Tails chakra, weaved from the finest spider silk and woven through with tough fuinjutsu for this very purpose. Naruto's red, vulpine eyes shrank and his sharp teeth elongated, as did his fingernails. 7 tails warped out from Naruto's tailbone. Using his extrasensory organs, he determined which direction Manda's head and tail were, and he faced the massive snake's head with the beach ball-sized sphere of dark chakra. Tailed beast ball, he called with finality and exhaled the ball of toxic chakra in the direction of Manda's head. It resembled a miniature sun, inverted black and thrumming with dark chakra. Hanging for dear life on one of the giant snake's fangs, Kabuto's eyes widened at the rapid approach of the giant chakra ball, instantaneously burning and withering whatever it touched as it surged up the snake's throat. The man shaded his eyes from the dark glow of the small sun and shouted, alarmed. The sphere shot faster than its size implied, and it seared through Kabuto, incinerating him, and instantly destroying Manda's head as it burst out. There was nothing, and there was no pain. One moment, Manda was alive, and the next he wasn't. The tailed beast ball imploded at the bottom of the sea, lashing vicious shockwaves into the dead snake, and thrashing Naruto back into the lining of the snake's stomach. The unending shockwaves tore the dead snake to shreds, sparking up a violent underwater earthquake and pulling Naruto deeper underwater. Hastily, the boy took out an oxygen mask from over his shoulder, inside his back, and fastened it to his face, inhaling grateful gulps of air and firing his brain to come up with an idea. He promised Aoki-chan that he would come back to her alive. Naruto's Kyuubi cloak glowed red and black in the darkness of the ocean floor. The boy pulled his spider limbs back into his body, as they would only be a hindrance in this situation, and he spat webs into his hands, clenching and unclenching his fists till the webs covered his hands completely. He turned his webbed hands into the current and swam along with it, propelling faster in the sea storm with his feet till he hit a current that whipped his upward, and he gladly flapped his hands. He windmilled his 7 tails hard, beating against the strong current. The darkness at the seafloor was gradually replaced by merry streams of light from the sun. Then a stray shockwave slammed into him, throwing his progress into disarray as he tumbled into a decline. The boy snapped against the urge to panic, grating his sharp teeth for any more ideas, until a pair of hands grabbed him under his arms and lifted him. Naruto looked up and met his godmother's golden yellow eyes, glittering and smiling. She pulled him out of the water and held him steady till he was properly treading water. The woman stood back and Naruto looked at her. Orochimaru didn't have the weary, tired circles around her eyes, and her gray complexion wasn't from any sickness. She looked healthy and happy, and it made Naruto smile, allowing his Kyuubi cloak to ooze back into his body. His tails receded till they were completely gone. The water was eerily still, and the two watched each other, not sure what to say. Naruto opened his mouth at the same time as his godmother's, and the two spoke the same words at the same time, I miss you. The undead woman smiled and Naruto's vulpine eyes glazed over. You're a lot stronger, Orochimaru said honestly, keeping the boy's watery stare with her trembling gaze. She refused to waste this short moment with him by crying, so she swallowed her tears and said, I see you're not with your goggles. You taught me not to need them, the boy said with an acknowledging bob of his head, scratching his cheek and, speaking in a strangely meek voice, added, and, they're with Aoki-chan. The woman's eyes lit up, optimistic. So, that means. The boy grinned, shrugging carelessly. I'm not sure what exactly Aoki-chan and I are, but I'm hoping to maybe find out when all of this dust settles. The more he spoke, the more elated and gleeful his godmother looked, biting her bottom lip and soaking in her godson's uncharacteristically shifty behavior. I'm taking her on a date for her birthday soon, so yeah. I'm thinking we'll find out soon. I'm truly happy for you, Naruto, the woman said warmly, touching her heart and sighing with a forlorn expression. I'm happy you didn't do what I did and swore off affection. Naruto half smiled, squeezing out an honest statement since they were alone. The world's a nicer place when I'm with her. He didn't want to sound braggy to his godmother, and with the eager nods and prompting of his godmother, he continued, feeling a swell in his heart, she makes me content. You get that from Minato, Orochimaru chirped, pleased. Hold on to that feeling. I'm glad you saved me when I was younger, Granny, Naruto admitted, his jaw twitching and standing upright. He saw his younger years flutter before his eyes. Lonely and depressed, he was a hopeless child, half blind and an outcast with no foreseeable future until his granny reached out to him, sent him his goggles and a desert duster spider. Sparking his fascination with spiders, his fixation on engineering and mechanics, and his addiction to science. I was alone, and you came for me, and I'm grateful for everything, he sputtered, pushing back the storm of emotions brewing in his chest when he saw flakes of chakra rise off his godmother, dispersing into the wind. Orochimaru smiled and neared her precious godson, taking his hands into hers and nodding to him as tears slid down her eyes, dropping off her chin and into the water. It has been a privilege and an honor being your granny. The boy rushed into her with an embrace and the woman chuckled, freely weeping. I lucked out having you in my life, Naruto. Thank you. The two stood in silence after that, the boy pushing his face into her chest and clenching his eyes shut, face twisted in anguish. A moment later, the two of them spoke the same words at the same time. I'll miss you. They shared a warm smile, and Orochimaru, proud godmother and legendary kunoichi, crumbled into dust. Across Fire Country, reincarnated ninjas fell apart and returned to their afterlife, releasing the tension of the combating ninjas in the country. Somewhere in Grass Country, Tsunade rubbed her aching knuckles, looking around at the gobsmacked, relieved ninjas standing around their camp. A handful of them stayed at the ready, shooting down any white Zetsu clone that reared out of a slim chasm, using Naruto's specialized blend of poison. They were camped out in front of a chasm, created by a Zetsu clone, and Tsunade blankly stared into the inky black abyss, torn on how the perilous chasm worsened the broken Grass Country landscape, formerly lush with grass and foliage, now broken and scorched by warfare. The woman didn't flinch or wince at the sharp whistling of crossbow bolts, tips soaked with Naruto's poison, flying into the chest of a Zetsu clone. The news of the undead shinobi falling apart had filtered through her camp. I'll be damned, she exhaled, perching her hands on her hips and frowning. The kid actually did it. On cue, a red snake with a white, diamond-shaped patch on its head slithered close to her heel, regurgitating a scroll at her feet and promptly dispersing. Kurenai picked the scroll from the ground, checked the scroll for traps and passed it to her Hokage. The woman's expression became grim. It read, 3 down, 2 to go. For your sake and the sake of everyone around you, I hope my demands have been met by the time I'm done. Old man Sarutobi doubted me too, just so you know. Your favorite drug baron, Naruto. The boy signed his threat with a flourishing signature, a fake one that curled and weaved unnecessarily. The woman carefully tore the boy's letter and unmindfully discarded the confetti into the wind. Sakura saw the conflicted look on the Hokage's face, and she asked, guessing the sender and contents of the letter, what are you going to do, Tsunade Shisho? The woman grumbled, crossing her arms and lowering her gaze with a reflectively creased brow. What can I do? You don't honestly think Naruto's going to hurt you, or Konoha, right? The girl followed slowly, coming to her teacher's side and looking out to the celebrating ninjas, jubilant that the worst of the disasters was now behind them. I mean, I know he's done bad things, terrible things, she said with a faltering look, glancing hopeful eyes to her Hokage. But he's not a bad person. The woman fixed her with a strong look, not voicing her words, but Sakura heard the reprimand loud and clear, turning away and saying, I know I sound delusional, but you don't know the Naruto that I know. Kind, considerate, and always smiling. That was a facade, Tsunade said, too tired with worry and relief. A mask. That boy is a genius-level psychopath. He does what he wants, takes what he wants, hurts whoever he wants, and he does it without regret. Her hands cracked and she crossed her arms tensed. The amount of classified information on him will break that illusion he has on you. The first thing to creep into her mind was Naruto's demented and sadistic video of how he tortured and experimented on Mizuki Toji into becoming a senseless, subservient spider monster. Mizuki Beast. Tsunade recalled what Naruto had called his monstrous creation inside his forgotten notes. The woman held strong as Sakura wilted, unable to argue that point. I just don't want you to get hurt. That's all. Tsunade-sama. Shizune approached from her left and Tsunade grunted, her eyes staring ahead at everything and nothing at all. The Raikage and his people have arrived. He wishes to discuss Naruto's demands with you and the other cage. Tell him we're waiting for the Tsuchikage to arrive before we talk about anything. Naruto frowned, and Shizune hesitated to return to the Kumo leader with such a delayed message. But Oanoki-sama was injured battling pain. Kuritsuchi-sama has taken temporary command of Iwagakure forces. Tsunade stopped her with an impatient bark. I'm aware. She arrived soon after Reikage-sama, Shizune finished, and Tsunade sighed heavily. There was a turgid pause between them, Tsunade not looking at Shizune, and Shizune pointedly watching Tsunade. Then Shizune tried at a smile, half frowning. Let's try and look at the positive. Naruto's Kitsugami Drug Company has revolutionized medicine and medical technology. They're an indispensable asset in this war. Built on torture, intimidation, the dead bodies of men, women and children, and a whole library of other crimes, Tsunade interjected. Legalizing its existence is a spit on the face of everyone he harmed. Don't you think I know that? Shizune whispered hotly. Sakura stepped between her teacher and her friend as Shizune swelled up against Tsunade, who remained impassive. Don't you think I want Naruto punished 10 times worse? Then don't defend him. I'm not defending him, Shizune said, her ire rising. But I want this war to end, and that butcher is the only one making a difference. Shizune, Shisho, it's all right, Sakura insisted, playing the peacemaker. Ahem, someone politely coughed to get their attention, and the three of them turned to the person. Gaara looked at each of them, his arms crossed and his voice measured. If Konoha does not wish to comply with Naruto-san's conditions, then we can all take a majority vote in favor and, politely, leave Konoha at the mercy of Naruto-san and the KDC. He spoke bluntly, and Tsunade didn't appreciate it. Gaara, though, overlooked the rising heat as the woman exhaled from her nose. As most of Naruto-san's victims are from Fire Country, I understand your indecision, Tsunade Dono. Don't claim you understand anything, Gaara Dono, Tsunade grated. But, Gaara proceeded, unintimidated and disconcertingly calm. Kumo and Iwa have also suffered from Naruto-san's exploits, but are willing to overlook that because of his war efforts. I only ask you to consider the health and well-being of your people. If Naruto deactivated his drug company's warehouses in Fire Country, again, there would be mass hysteria due to the unattainability of certain essential medicines. The KDC was so deeply rooted in Konoha's, and the continent's, way of life that if any village or country was isolated, the fallout would be catastrophic. It was so gradual and so methodical. Tsunade was almost tempted to applaud the boy on this grand achievement, knowing well that a considerable portion of the credit for expanding the KDC rested on Naruto's second-in-command, Aoki-chan. Kiri's reconstruction rested on a bedrock of KDC support. Suna's revitalization was built on a foundation of KDC support. Iwa's redemption and reintroduction to the world, after trying and succumbing to the pressures of Naruto's company, was bolstered by KDC support. Kumo's waning population were being sustained and revitalized by KDC support. Konoha's health and medical sector would be crippled without KDC support. Smaller villages and countries were throwing open their doors, and happily waving the KDC in. The other cage must have noticed the global manipulation, burrowing its tentacles as deep as the continent's black market, but rather looked the other way for the sake of staying in the good graces of Naruto, Aoki-chan and the Kitsugami Drug Company. They were only seeing good things from their alliance with Naruto's company, and they wanted to keep it that way. Naruto wouldn't bat an eye at anyone's defection, and would relish in their suffering. Tsunade inhaled slowly and exhaled. Soon, she promised herself. I'll break Naruto's hold on this world soon. The Assembly of Five Kage agreed to comply with Naruto's demands, and summarily started erasing his wanted status in their respective bingo books, formally established the Kitsugami Drug Company as a legal entity, and sent orders for their shinobi to not antagonize the workers of that massive corporation. Reports came in that Kisame Hoshigaki was injured and fleeing across grass country to Kiri, and Aoki-chan was giving chase. Kiri scouts reported that the Ronin had separated her quarry from Samahata, as well as one of his arms, and was executing rain ninja that stepped in her way. Naruto hid his smile as he strolled through a dense forest back to Konoha. This would be a lot faster if you'd taken one of my spiders, he said smoothly, walking with his hands behind his head and with an easy stride. His hoodie was thrown over his head, casting a shadow over his face, except for his evil red eyes, sparkling deviously under the shade. The earpiece he spoke into remained silent for a moment, aside from the infrequent panting and the sharp rush of wind. The boy closed his eyes and hummed, and Aoki-chan scoffed breathily. Is that regret I'm hearing? I'm perfectly capable of doing this without spiders, sir. A quick frown flickered over Naruto's frown at her address. I've chased down and killed harder game than this coward. She released a hard breath and Naruto heard the sound of feet pelting down gravel. He heard her smile through his earpiece, asking him, how's the hunt on your side? Just about done. I barely used any jutsu for the last one, he replied honestly, stopping and pursing his lips. His vulpine eyes looked to his right and he hummed reflectively, 3 dead, Madara's being tricky. Are we talking about the one-armed Madara Uchiha or the real one? Whichever I find first, Naruto answered, frowning at the ripple of goosebumps that crossed up his right arm to his shoulder, furrowing his brow. A slow grin cracked on his face. His white, serrated teeth displayed clearly from the shadow of his hoodie. I think someone's playing a game with me. Sir, I'll call you later. Happy hunting, Aoki-chan, he trilled merrily and tapped his earpiece before his confused friend could answer, pulling it out and stuffing it into his pocket. The boy rolled his wrists and twitched his head left, cracking it to the right and eliciting a nice crack with each twist. He rolled his left shoulder, turning around in a full circle and observing the stillness of the twisted forest. The animal life was silent. A cool rush breeze streamed up from the sea. The evergreen trees rustled. Naruto's ears twitched and his head rang, before an exploding tag attached itself to his back, making him groan and look up to the sky, where the Angel of Aim grandly hovered. You're not Madara, the boy said frankly with a frown, perching his fists on his hips and sagging his shoulders to show his disappointment. The explosive tag on his back rapidly duplicated, covering his body from head to toe, leaving only his evil vulpine eyes staring to the heavens, before they too were covered by the layer of explosives. Devil, the woman called him, impassive and peering down at the boy with a condescending stare. She said with finality, Katsu. Naruto's laughter echoed loudly amid the din of fiery explosions. Chapter 10. In the pursuit of knowledge and wealth, Naruto freely gave up his humanity. He did it to himself, and he didn't regret it. Naruto leapt out of the inferno, cloaked in fiery red Kyuubi chakra. His large vulpine eyes burned with elation, the 3 whisker marks glowed, and his wide grin darkened with sinister intent from the blackness of the boy's hood, more so as Konan swerved out of the way in a gust of papery wings, avoiding a pair of massive chakra arms from snatching her out of the sky. He dropped back into the burning forest, and a stream of cackling followed his disappearance, before that too stopped abruptly. Silence. The only sounds within a 15-mile radius were the groaning crackle of trees as they burned, the mewl of forest animals fleeing the flames or dying to the fire, and the slight sizzle of wet soil hardening from the heat. Konan flew higher, avoiding the lash of fire and heat nipping at her heels, her expressionless face cracking, and she frowned ever so invisibly, looking below her and searching for the deranged child. She skirted away when the boy bounded from the forest fire, but this time the boy whipped around and clasped his hands behind his head as he fell back into the forest, beaming as he called out, "Got you." Konan's eyes flared wide and she slapped her neck, killing the spider perched under her left ear, but it was too late. The creature had sunk its fangs into a vein and Konan's body locked up, slamming upright and ramrod. She tumbled out of the sky as her chakra fled her, scattering in the wind like her paper wings. She couldn't scream, her jaw screwed tightly shut, hard enough for her to feel the creak of her teeth grinding against themselves despite the roaring howl of the wind as she plummeted from the heavens and the bellowing forest fire she crashed into, breaking her back into a burning tree and smacking stiffly onto the hard forest floor. Her eyes bulged from their sockets, whirring wildly as her irises shrank to pinpricks. The forest was red and the heat clogged her throat, already hardly able to breathe from the venom. The flames licked her skin and burned her body, charring her Akatsuki robes and her shinobi clothes. Her sweat evaporated from her body and her skin darkened as she burned, coated with ash from the tree she had snapped her back against as she fell, lying in the wreckage of burned wood and ash. HNG, she grunted through gnashed teeth, her stoic face shattering, panting hoarsely and swallowing, growing panic rising from her gut as her body refused to obey her. Contrasting her paralysis, Konan was finely attuned to every sensation happening around her. The fire lapping her face and body, the hiss and sizzle as her clothes burned, and the slightly heated wind that rumbled through the forest from the south. She heaved, flicking her eyes down to her right at a distinct crunch, the sound of feet marching on hardened soil and ash. Naruto entered her line of sight, tugging back his hood and smiling with deceptive niceness. The Kyuubi cloak shrouding his body resembled the flame of a candle, steadily flickering red and protecting him from the heat of the forest. His red, vulpine eyes were ablaze as he bore down on her, standing close to her head. "Honest question," he began, the mask of kindness on his face lifted and the corners of his lips tingled. Closing his eyes and smiling shallowly, "Have you ever been a hostage?" He bounced his fist against her face, and the woman slumped unconscious. 2 hours later, a camcorder reached the hands of the leader of Pain, delivered by a spindly, tall spider, bearing the recognizable markings of the spider clan on its bulbous abdomen. It regurgitated a single finger, a middle finger with black nail polish, not minding the slobber that leaked from its fanged mouth. The spider met the Rinnegan holder's dark stare, standing upright on its 8 legs and surveying everyone in the throne room with its 8 black eyes. Marking the one-armed, orange-masked man, another man with shaggy black hair who had his arms crossed, a black and white creature with a Venus flytrap around its head, and a faceless aim ninja that had directed him to the village leader's throne room. Before he looked back to Nagato when the man hadn't so much as looked down at the video recording device. Rather, Nagato's purple eyes thrummed with growing rage, glaring at the middle finger that had rolled to the foot of his throne. "Watch," the spider hissed, its guttural tone echoing in the stunned silence of the throne room. "Master wants you to see something." The black and white creature approached the middle finger at the foot of the throne, bending down to pick it up, studying it with a critical look. Zetsu, the AIM leader, spoke deeply, his fingers curled around the camcorder and vibrating with killer intent. "Is that?" The one named Zetsu hesitated, flicking a look to the one-armed man, then turning to Nagato, hiding the severed finger at his back. It nodded, and Nagato inhaled and exhaled rapidly. The spider didn't move. It didn't blink, and its words didn't so much as tremble as he hissed, "Watch the video. Do as the creature said." Nagato, the man with shaggy, long hair, said, the sinister depths of his voice driving chills through the spider, a fear that it refused to show. Grinding his teeth and glowering murderously at the defiant spider, Nagato powered on the camcorder and watched the video. A brief static covered the screen of the video recording device before it cleared up to show a dark, featureless room. A single orange light bulb swung back and forth from the ceiling, previously jostled by some unseen presence. The camera swayed a little, tipping to the left before it was corrected, held somewhat steady as it faced the light bulb. Then the person holding the camera lowered it down and a genially smiling blonde peered out of the video at the redhead. Naruto. His hands were on both sides of the camcorder, his tongue sticking out of the corner of his mouth and his brow creased, before he said, "Hold it like this." "Like this?" the person holding the camera echoed. "A female. Your last hostage video was slanted though. You said you wanted to capture the mood." The video recorder lifted and fell a bit as if the person holding the camera didn't see the need to stabilize her hands as she shrugged. "Not your best work." "Not my best work," the boy admitted with a sigh, letting go of the camera as the camerawoman stood back a step. He pointed at the camera. "Is it recording?" "Yup." "Really?" His brow jumped up, before he waved his hands flippantly. It's fine. I'll edit this part out." The camera zoomed out a little, showing that the boy was in a white lab coat with his usual hoodie underneath, dark pants and black shoes, wearing a pair of blue plastic gloves on his hands. Naruto's face then scrunched up and he tapped his lips, asking the camerawoman, "What's that guy's name again?" "The guy with the purple eyes." He scratched the top of his head. "It starts with an N. It's on the tip of my tongue." "Nagato?" Naruto snapped his fingers at her, smiling affirmatively. "Nagato. Should we start over? As endearing as your randomness can be, I think you should have practiced first." The boy scoffed, rolling his eyes and tucking his hands into his pockets, saying matter-of-factly, "You love it." The girl behind the camera scoffed loudly and Naruto's smile broadened, rolling his eyes again and proceeded, "Back to business. Nagato," he pointed at the camera and smirked, a careless expression that looked too harmlessly mischievous on his face. "I've got your friend." He moved to the right, waving for the camera to follow him. And it did, turning around steadily as Naruto shuffled across the screen. The camera settled on a person wearing a black shirt and tights, no shoes, laid out on her back on an operating table, her ankles, knees, wrist, elbows, neck and temple. Her mouth was stuffed with a white handkerchief. The person holding the camera took her time walking around the table, looking down on the pitiful condition of the angel of aim. The thumb and middle fingers of her left hand were jaggedly torn off. The fingernails of her right hand were popped upright, freely bleeding on the table and dropping on the unseen floor. There was a line of stitches that crossed her lower abdomen, newly administered, as the wound still stained the thread red. There was a wet patch under and around her crotch. Sweat stains dirtied the pits and neck of her shirt, and splotches of blood could be seen on the table. Conan trembled every so often, shuddering and gulping with her mouth open. Conan here, he swept to the head of the operating table and clasped his hands on Conan's shoulders, making the woman recoil and whimper. Her pleas muffled by the handkerchief, has been extremely cooperative. He grinned suddenly, exposing his rows of serrated teeth in a malevolent expression of glee. Haven't you, Conan? The woman on the operating table tried to nod her head, quaking fearfully and weeping a few tears from her largely widened eyes, directing a look to the camera before flicking a weeping glance up, looking at the boy standing by her head. Something not many people know is that there is no such thing as complete pain tolerance, Naruto lectured, squeezing the woman's shoulders and making the woman jerk. A person could be able to endure being stabbed, getting an arm torn out, or have their eyes pulled out of their sockets without so much as losing to the pain and releasing their secrets. But, he held up a finger, there will always be something they cannot endure. He motioned to Conan's hands, her missing digits and the raised fingernails, gesturing also to her torn open and stitched shut gut. Conan was tough. Her pain tolerance is through the roof. Otherworldly. He centered the video recording of himself, chuckling genially. Now, I'm going to respect Conan's privacy and not reveal the nature of pain she can't endure. He dramatically placed a hand on his chest and fluttered his vulpine eyes. I might be a monster, but I have morals. The girl behind the camera released a short laugh, quickly stopping her amusement when Naruto shushed her, smiling. I know your weakness, Nagato. He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder, and it's not her. The boy gingerly pulled off his plastic gloves, balling them up and carelessly tossing them over his right shoulder. The rain clouds over aim thickened and the rain pelted down harder, thundering and crackling with lightning. Everyone besides the messenger spider looked out of the window at the heavy downpour, noticing that the rain sparkled, like miniature gems pouring from the sky and splashing on whoever, or whatever it fell on, splattering exactly like water. The video recording continued, with Naruto easing his lab coat off, neatly folding it as he said, "There's more than one way to destroy a village. You don't have to have massive muscles, and you don't have to use apocalyptic techniques." He blinked his red eyes at the camera, staring out of the video recording device and looking straight into Nagato's soul. I'm a force of nature, Nagato. The storm outside picked up and sheets of rain wore down on the building, forcing the people on the ground to scatter in search of shelter, holding on for dear life to anything bolted to the floor. I only need a good enough reason. He flexed his right arm and grinned cheekily, eyes closed and crinkled at the corners, patting his bicep with his left hand. And the will to do it. A story building fell, succumbing to the battering of the elements in a disastrous roar of wind and the screams of the occupants. The hard rain fractured the paved sidewalks and the asphalt roads, eroding them. You'd be surprised what a few mixtures thrown into Hidden Rain's atmosphere can do. A flash flood swept through the village, carrying shrieking citizens. Hidden Rain ninjas rushed, surfing the water and picking civilians that had been carried off by the rapids. Some of the civilians couldn't be rescued, dashed against the sides of buildings or forced under the water by the strength of the current. The village's developed drainage and sewage systems were overloaded, flooding the entirety of the village with rampaging rainwater and human waste. The walls of some residential homes came down catastrophically by a combination of the gale and the flood, mercilessly slamming into the occupants. The panicked calls of parents calling for their children sounded under the howl of rain and wind. Here's what I want you to do, Naruto said, fixing Nagato with an unwavering look. The camera was positioned in such a way that only Naruto's face could be seen, and the dark backdrop of the room melted away. The boy's face was unnervingly stoic, staring hollowly out of the camcorder. Call your forces back to Hidden Rain, abandon the war, and never look back. The rush of waters slammed into the Amikage Tower, breaking through the ranks of ninjas withstanding the force at the doors and flooding the reception area. Water gradually filled the stairwell, climbing from the ground floor to the first floor. As for Madara, whichever Madara, I don't care, kindly bundle him up and leave him outside of the village. I'll catch Zetsu sooner or later. The one-armed Madara activated his Sharingan and vanished into a vortex, spiraling into his right eye and disappearing completely. The other Madara remained unfazed, although his teeth gnashed with a hard curse. Do that and I won't wash Hidden Rain off the face of the earth. The boy shrugged. Maybe you'll even get Conan back. Who knows? The great doors of the throne room exploded inwards and water surged into the hall. Nagato sharply lifted his eyes to Madara, the Madara that hadn't fled, and his Rinnegan hummed with power. The ground echoed with explosions, coming from below the ground level and rapidly powering upwards, punching hole after hole from underground and shaking the building, forcing water to flood the subterraneous tunnels of the tower. Just as soon as the redhead forced gravity to keep the Uchiha fixed to the spot, Madara flickered away in a blur of speed, barely avoiding two pairs of arms that broke out of the ground to capture him. He blazed in a wide arc around the growing hole in the throne room, leaving a path of afterimages in his wake as a red laser doggedly chased him, screaming through the rock wall of the great hall and screaming to sever the undead Uchiha's legs, trying to stop him from fleeing. The hole from which the path erupted enlarged and water poured into it. No one on the floors below was safe from this crumbling expansion, either caught in the flood or falling victim to tumbling into the abyss below as the building broke apart. Their wails as they plummeted into the hole weakened the lower they fell. The messenger spider leapt to the wall and attached himself there, spectating the events unfurling before his very eyes. Madara raced across the wall, dodging a red-tipped missile and bound off the wall to Nagato. His dark eyes spiraled, turning red and evolving. The statue looming behind the leader of Hidden Rain groaned as Madara landed behind the Amikage. Nagato's head toppled off his shoulders, falling to the ground and tumbling down the 6 steps to the bottom, splashing into the water at the foot of the throne. Madara lowered his gunbai, the large, unbreakable, gourd-shaped fan, and grunted with a displeased frown as the head rolled down the Amikage's front, tumbling down the stairs and dropped into the water. It bobbed on the water, its mouth agape with horror and shock. Madara didn't glance away as the storm outside stopped all too suddenly, falling to a calm still as rays of sunlight penetrated the thick clouds, bathing the broken village in light. Nagato's headless body slumped to the side, propped up by the chakra rods impaled into his back and connected to the broken demonic statue. There were 30 seconds of uninterrupted silence, where a constant stream of flood water rushed down the several holes the path had punched through to reach the throne room. Standing with a stunned slouch at the bottom of the stairs, Zetsu gawked at what had just occurred in 1 minute. Tobi was gone, Nagato was dead, Conan was captured, Hidden Rain was finished. Let's see how quickly you all turn on each other. The camcorder was still in Nagato's hands, clasped in his fingers, and Naruto laughed hysterically. People are so predictable. And with that parting message, the video flicked off. It dropped out of Nagato's formerly rigid death grip and noisily fell down the stair, splashing into the water. The demonic statue creaked, its 5 open eyes glaring down at the unimpressed Uchiha, swirling with the presence of the sealed-tailed beasts. The 1 tail, 3 tails, 4 tails, 5 tails, and 6 tails. The ethereal blue arm evaporated into nothing. The spider messenger dispelled to warn his master of the battle ahead. A final encounter between the greatest shinobi in history and the craftiest ninja to ever live was on the horizon. A battle that would reshape the physical world and history itself. He found the boy waiting outside of AIM. The sky was clear and the sun was shining. Naruto stood on the waterlogged ground, balancing naturally so that the mud didn't seep into his sandals, with his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie, the hood thrown up over his head and obscuring his face from view. Besides his red, fox-like eyes and his large, saw-toothed grin. Peeking out from the wrists of the boy's hoodie were 3 short nozzles, polished clean and primed with Naruto's specialized medical needles. Madara stopped a long distance from him, standing relaxedly with his feet apart and his arms crossed. His gunbai was strapped to his back and his eyes rippled purple with concentric circles. The tension between them silenced any noise in their surroundings. Lovely day, isn't it, Madara? The Uchiha narrowed his eyes. I'm glad you're the one that showed up, not that other one with the orange mask, Naruto went on, squinting a look up at the merrily shining sun. You can just tell he isn't cut out to face an enemy with no common decency. Madara glowered, lingering a gaze around to the waterlogged hidden village. Obito informed me of your drug enterprise, Madara finally spoke up, directing a hard look across the gap to the evil-eyed child. Would war not be more profitable? You need to think about the long term, Naruto smirked. War isn't long term. The conditions the village leaders agreed to, now that's long term. Now I can live my life and do my research in peace. He took his hands out of his pockets and raised them in a dramatic shrug. I'm past making a profit. I've made enough profit to last me 5 lifetimes. The boy motioned to Madara, asking, what's your reason? The revival of my clan. Their restoration to their rightful place. The boy hurriedly pursed his lips, suppressing his laugh. But that will have to wait until I handle you, boy. Naruto's brow twitched. Is that right? Madara didn't reply and his Rinnegan glowed. Quickly, Naruto raised his forearm guards to his face and chin, and a complete Susanoo warped out from Madara's eyes and cut the distance between himself and the boy in an instant, grabbing the boy and squeezing its fist, crushing the child into a bloody paste. Madara wasn't deceived though. His Susanoo's fist exploded open with red fire and an unearthly beast burst out with a vengeful bellow, growing to be the same giant size as Madara's Susanoo as the Uchiha reared back. The creature that had exploded out from Naruto's former position was a giant red fox, billowing with red fire and landing with a heavy crash. There were a series of thick black lines materializing across its body, prominent of which was the 3 concentric circles at the back of its head and its gut. Its 9 tails swayed hypnotically at its back and the boy hovered inside its head chuckled warily, one eye open and reforming his legs from a mass of writhing spiders. Naruto's features and clothes mirrored the great beast, having the same concentric circles on his body and a series of lines running down his shoulders and his pants to his footwear. The shadow obscuring his face didn't lift, highlighting his dangerous red eyes, his pronounced red whiskers and his broad grin. A pair of horns rose from the top of his hood, curving backwards. The 9 tails snarled, exhaling smoke from its maw as it lowered into a crouch. Its claws shattered the earth as he gripped the ground. A second pair of arms and hands materialized, curling to the creature's back and meshing its fingers into a ram seal at its lower back, gathering chakra inside its gut and compacting the chakra into a ball. Madara's dark blue Susanoo sprouted a pair of feathery cerulean wings, standing over the Kyuubi with a pair of burning blue katana in its right hand, while the ends of his wings curled into hands, gripping the sheaths of his swords. A second face manifested at the back of the Susanoo's head, a horrific creation with a pair of owlish eyes that revolved with Madara's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, an elongated nose and lips that were twisted into a grotesque frown. The eyes at the front of the Susanoo spiraled purple, mirroring Madara's Rinnegan. Come, boy. Naruto laughed and lunged forward, stampeding at dazing speed to his opponent. Madara stepped forward once and swung his swords down, but the Kyuubi skirted away and roared, gripping the earth to stop himself short and hanging its mouth wide open. There was a sharp twinkle inside the beast's mouth and Madara moved his swords to guard his face, slicing a tailed beast ball in half, deflecting them to both sides of him and devastating the ground below. The man spun away from a second and third beast ball, and broke a kick into the snout of the 9 tails, blasting it off the ground. Airborne, Madara threw his swords at the beast and the blades sliced into the creature's head and stomach, and the monster dispelled. The Uchiha grunted and whipped around, catching the 9 tails by the throat before it could land on his back. He only caught the frantic hand seals Naruto was weaving together at the last second, unable to throw the creature away when it coiled all of its 9 tails around his opponent. Web Bomb. Level 10. A white sphere appeared between the creature's hands and it clapped, breaking it. The explosion of thick, quickly hardening webs tangled both chakra manifestations. Tiny brown spiders with beeping abdomens traveled across the web explosion, adding more layers to the trap and encasing both the Kyuubi and the Susanoo. Naruto was the first to dispel his chakra manifestation, still coated in Kyuubi chakra and running at blistering speeds across the webtangle. He held his right arm forward and clenched his fist, shooting a round of medical needles tipped with poison. The needles splintered against the Susanoo. Madara, fighting against the trap to move his Susanoo's arms, snapped his head up to where the needles had impacted and gnashed his teeth when he saw that small section crack. The structural integrity of the Susanoo was compromised, likely from a chemical mixture in the boy's arsenal that directly attacked chakra. Naruto leapt through the crack and slammed the sole of his foot into Madara's face. A shockwave of Kyuubi chakra rippled across the landscape, starting from Madara's face and racing down the Susanoo, incinerating the web bomb and blasting outwards. The earth splintered and hid in rain, not too far from them, cried as more buildings came down, burning with toxic flames. Madara exploded out of his Susanoo and smashed into the ground, rolling on his back twice before he flipped with the momentum, dodging a hail of needles and pushing off the earth on his last backflip, and tugging his gunbai off his back. He swung the fan-like sword upwards and a roaring surge of sharp wind scattered another hail of senbon, casting away a flood of spider summons that had risen from the ground in an ambush. Lifted off the ground, the spiders dispelled back to their summoning realm. Naruto's laugh echoed and Madara snapped, his Rinnegan pulsing madly. Enough games, boy. Why? Naruto's question sounded from everywhere and nowhere, projecting his voice. This is fun. The muddy ground had hardened from the Kyuubi fire and a series of craters had pulverized the earth. A large, humanoid bonfire burned menacingly where his Susanoo had formerly stood, crackling with an unnaturally red fire. Fine. You want to play games? Madara growled and closed his eyes. The area around his eyes darkened and the Hashirama visage on his chest, under his armor, howled in a voiceless tone as the Uchiha gathered nature chakra, seamlessly entering sage mode. The man opened his eyes and his Rinnegan flicked up, watching the boy fall from the sky, cracking a manic grin at the beaming child. Let's play. Naruto crash-landed, falling on an afterimage. The boy got back to his feet and ambled out of the crater, sweeping his maniacal eyes for any sign of his opponent. His Kyuubi cloak rippled in the non-existent wind and his eyes widened, snapping to his right but smacked into the ground by a right hook. The boy sprang back to his feet, lowering his stance and guarding his face, and a kick slammed into his gut. A punch rocked the other side of his face and a clubbing blow smashed his head into the ground. You are a remarkable child, Madara said, seeing the boy haggardly rise off the ground onto a knee and rubbing the back of his head with a hard wince. A line of blood dripped down his chin from the scalp wound, and the boy cursed, his elated expression never wavering as he searched for the man. But your intelligence is your doom. The boy didn't answer, shakily getting to his feet. Madara flickered to his front and dug an uppercut into Naruto's chin. All too suddenly, Naruto soared above the clouds, jarred and amazed. Naruto collided with the side of a mountain on the other side of the continent. Snappily, the boy whipped back to his feet and looked around him, alarmed at the snow that sizzled against his Kyuubi cloak. He glanced down, stretching his senses as far they could reach and gnashed his teeth, hissing a curse when he looked down. He had landed on a steep mountain among a range of mountains, capped with thick snow and dangerously cold winds. Naruto could breathe easily at any altitude, but what caught him by surprise was that he was in lightning country. The boy moved precariously through the snow, unaffected by the cold because of his cloak of toxic red fire, which made him stick out like a single candle stubbornly flickering at the center of a snowstorm. Naruto's head rang and he looked up, feeling a sweet chill roll down his spine. The sun was coming down from the sky. Fire style. Great fireball annihilation, Madara pronounced from the sky, exhaling the planet-sized wall of fire and gas to the boy. The boy slapped his hands and pushed his palms outwards, and his Kyuubi chakra extended from his core and created an enlarged pair of nine-tails hands. The hands rapidly increased in size and extended further and further, catching the sun in their palms and pushing while fixing his feet to the ground with chakra. Naruto bared his teeth and roared, feeling the sun fight against his hands, slowly winning as his feet were forced to shuffle back. Something sparked in the boy's head and another pair of fiery hands materialized from his cloak, from his ribcage, and clasped together into the dragon seal. Another pair of burning red arms erupted from the boy's shoulders, settling at the back of his head and tangling together into the tiger hand seal. Effectively multitasking, the hands at the back of his head began to gather nature chakra and the hands at his front channeled his natural chakra. Summoning Jutsu. Sagi. A cloud of smoke covered him before the cold wind of the mountaintop cleared it away. Naruto was now standing on a spider. A horse-sized, sagely white spider with beady red eyes and a contemplative expression. She hissed, speaking to her creator and master in an unexpectedly delicate slither of words. Already on it, master. She wedged her 8 legs into the snowy mountain, standing strong despite the sun barreling to them from the heavens, and began to meditate. It took her a few seconds. 2 of the 4 dots over Naruto's eyebrows, his extra eyes, grew in size and became beady red vulpine eyes, horrifically similar to Naruto's original eyes. The dots at the bridge of his nose stretched downwards into long, black lines, resembling rivulets of tears flowing down from Naruto's eyes, curving around his grinning mouth and reaching his chin. The curved horns sprouting from the boy's temple stayed red, but with a hissing white tip at their end. Supporting her master by collecting nature chakra and easing him into Sage mode, the flames covering the boy changed from red to white, and his pants and shoes rippled black. A spider emblem drew itself on the back of his hoodie, its 4 lower legs reaching his heels and its 4 upper arms draping over his shoulders. He called this form his spider mode. This mixture of Naruto's chakra, Kyuubi chakra and nature chakra spiraled up the enlarged hand, changing it white till it reached the sun pushing against his palms, snapping his hands together and crushing the ball of fire. The spider sage skipped aside, her master perched on her back and dispelling his large arms, and Madara came down, cleaving off a large portion of the mountain with his gunbai, triggering a landslide. The large spider bounded from falling rock to falling rock, skittering up and shooting webs from its abdomen to avoid getting crushed by oversized chunks of rock. Naruto kept low, zeroing his eyes on the bonfire of chakra barreling down the face of the breaking mountain to meet the boy. Naruto jumped off his summons and cocked his right fist back, bearing a vicious snarl and releasing his fist against the flat side of Madara's gunbai as the Uchiha used it to guard his face. A blinding light covered the planet and the earth momentarily stopped spinning. The tides rose to impossible heights. The tectonic plates of the earth shifted restlessly. A wall of wind flattened the Lightning Country mountain range. Across the continent, KDC warehouse Fuinjutsu defenses worked hard to keep the buildings standing upright. The shockwaves spreading down from Lightning Country battered villages and countries indiscriminately. Sagi, blinded by the flash even though she had closed her eyes and looked away, powered against the massive battering shockwaves and weaved a net, catching her master before he could smack to the bottom of the decimated mountain range. The boy clambered out of the net, sparing an appreciative nod to the spider elder and pointedly ignoring the mangled state of his right arm. Madara coolly strolled down the wreckage of rock. Naruto growled with a smile, seeing that the only damage the ninja had sustained was his heavily dented gunbai and that the upper half of his armor was seared off his body, revealing his bare chest to the ragged boy. The man looked at his unbreakable gunbai, bent inwards from a decisive blow, and tossed it away, slowly turning to the boy. "To think this is your best," Madara said with a stoic grunt, the disappointment nearly ebbing off him in waves. Pitiful. Naruto's grin widened painfully. He reached with his left hand and grabbed his right elbow. Sagi saw what he wanted to do, and she screamed, "Master!" Naruto tore off his right arm with a pained grit of his sharp teeth, pulling it clean out from his shoulder and carelessly discarding it. The white cloak covering him flickered normally, uninterrupted. "I'll grow a new one later," Naruto reassured her with a wincing beam, manipulating his chakra to grow for him a new appendage, made entirely out of the white flames. The balanced blend of the 3 types of chakra whirling inside the boy's reserves, his own, Kyuubi chakra, and nature chakra, worked to heal the boy's wound, while Naruto flexed the fingers of his right arm, rolling the shoulder and checking for full mobility. The eyes on his temple flicked to Sagi and his original eyes stayed on Madara. "Obito was right," Madara said, unclipping the heavy armor at his waist and letting it fall, leaving him in a plain pair of black pants and black shinobi sandals. "You most certainly have lost your mind." "Thanks," Naruto replied, chirping chipperly and stabbing a needle into his right shoulder, sighing pleasantly as his antibiotics went to work. "Never let them know your next move, I always say." He pointed a finger to his mutilated arm and Sagi obediently pounced on it, swallowing it whole, senbon launcher and all. Next, he pointed at Madara, beckoning the man to come. "Well?" Naruto was torn off the ground and pulled to Madara, laughing wildly as the man slammed his fist into the boy's throat, only for Naruto to disperse into a mad tangle of white spiders, clambering over and onto Madara. The man, alarmed by the spiders swarming him and sinking their teeth into his body, spread his arms open and a Susanoo billowed out from his pores, sending the spiders off him. The Susanoo flicked off and the man cursed, winding around with a kick and smacking his foot into Naruto's forearm guard, shielding his left ear and delivering a jab to the man's chest, which was dodged with a sidestep. The man pushed the boy away and Naruto surged back, getting a knee driven into his gut and leaning deeply into Madara's blow, manifesting a spider appendage from his back and driving it into Madara's shoulder. Madara snapped his teeth, frustrated by the tricks, and tore the limb out of his shoulder, driving a straight kick into Naruto's chin. The boy backflipped 3 times, pulling the poisoned spider appendage back into his body all the while. He hurriedly fell to a knee and dodged a clothesline, barely missing losing his head. Flexible and in a daze of speed, the boy contorted backwards from his knee. Naruto planted his hands onto the ground and whacked a kick to the man's jaw. The man grunted from the blow and caught the leg, only for Naruto to scatter into a flurry of venomous spiders, injecting Madara as many times as they could before they were shredded off the Uchiha by a Susanoo. "You can't keep this up, Madara," Naruto told the man, rising out of the ground under Madara, inside the Susanoo, and winding a right hook into Madara's jaw. The blow slammed the man against his Susanoo, bouncing him back to Naruto, who planted a straight kick into Madara's nose, sending him through the Susanoo. The blue manifestation shattered noisily and the man rolled on his back, only for Naruto to drive a knee into Madara's nose, breaking it in a shower of blood. "You're getting weak, I can tell." The man chuckled lowly, breaking his expressionless mask. Gathering himself to his knees and running a hand under his nose, he saw blood. "Trickery. Funny. I've never known you to be an honorable man." The man bolted to his feet, with a twister of speed, and slammed a palm into Naruto's chest. The boy dug his feet into the ground and reached forward with his elbow, smacking the man's face with it and reeling back with a back fist to Madara's temple, finishing the blinding sequence with a headbutt that flattened the man into the ground. "You're a very hard man to tag, Madara Uchiha," Naruto conceded with a sly smile. "I've been trying throughout this fight to get a good hit, and at the end of the day, it was your cockiness that killed you." The man hacked, weakly turning onto his side and expelling blood from his mouth. He heaved, sitting up, but Naruto laid him back down with a punt to the head. The toxin took full effect and the Uchiha couldn't move at all, rendered too weak to lift a finger. That, and the jarring concussion from the foot to the head. "Never let them know your next move." "I agree." Naruto looked over his shoulder at the speaker, a simmering smirk rising on his lips at Madara's watery, bleeding laughter. At his back, Zetsu had Aoki-chan by the scruff of her collar, twisting the girl's left arm behind her back and forcing her to stay on her toes. Her discomfort was evident on her twisted face. Zetsu was using the girl as a buffer between itself and the scientist. Naruto's head flopped forward with a heavy sigh, muttering audibly, "Damn it, I told you to hide." "I," stammered, sporting a shallow black eye and without her sword. "I was worried." The boy grit his teeth and Zetsu glanced around Aoki-chan, a dangerously wild look in its eyes. "You think you're the only one that doesn't mind using hostages?" The boy pulled his hoodie off his head, maintaining his spider mode, showing that his blonde hair was a white flame and his pallid complexion was paler, emphasizing the redness of his 4 eyes, the whisker marks on his cheeks, and the deep black lines running down from the bridge of his nose to his chin. His burning red horns curved from his temple and the boy's venomous teeth gnashed with indecision. "The one time you don't listen to me is when you get caught." Madara's unhinged laughter filtered into his ears and the boy closed his eyes. Laying on his back, the man narrowed a chuckling glare at the boy. "The antidote, boy." Now, Naruto's shoulders slouched and he palmed his face with his left hand, slowly rubbing his face and pinching the bridge of his nose. Naruto exhaled, saying as he casually shrugged, "It was nice while it lasted." The samurai stammered, eyes wide with horror. "Wait, Naruto, no." Zetsu shared that expression, but the boy already leveled his left senbon launcher at the samurai, clenching his fist and releasing a spray of 4 finger-length needles. The needles whistled through the air and peppered the girl, exiting her back and impaling the plant creature at her back. The samurai wheezed and toppled back onto Zetsu. Naruto strolled to her sightline and raised an eyebrow at her, seeing the glazed terror and betrayal marring her face. He rolled his eyes and held a hand down at her. "Get up, you big faker." The girl's face immediately cleared from her anguished expression, switching to one of annoyance, gnashing her teeth as she took her boss's hand, helping her back to her feet. "It still hurts. I didn't get any of your vitals." "You're fine," he said easily, dusting down her back for grass and dust. The fiery white chakra cloak didn't affect the girl. When he was satisfied and at the girl's complaints, he took hold of both sides of her face and leveled her with a searching look, asking her a lingering question. "Did it?" "No." She shook her head, lifting her hands and setting them on the back of his hands, smiling a little, pained but pleased. "He just caught me by surprise." The boy furrowed his brow at the hilarity. "You, Aoki-chan, killer of Kisame and my best girl, got caught off guard? Shut up." The girl rolled her eyes and shoved him away, much to his open amusement, laughing. "If you kept one of my spiders on you, I won't have needed to shoot you." The girl lifted her chin stubbornly. "I stand by my decision." Naruto shook his head, exasperated and used to her samurai pride at this point. Her rigid stance on tradition and Naruto's lack of morals were a common clashing point for them, as agreeable as they were most of the time. He beckoned her to stand still, pulling a syringe from his left sleeve and flicking off the cap on the needle. He went to her and she eased up one of her sleeves for him to push the needle inside, squeezing the antibiotic and painkiller into her system from her arm. She breathed out, calmer, and the twisted pain on her face lightened. "That should hold you till I get a better look at those wounds," Naruto said, sealing the syringe into a storage seal on his left elbow. Some of the concoction had leaked into Aoki-chan as it passed through her, but it was a blend specially made to combat Zetsu clones. The very same ones he gave the Shinobi Alliance to combat the formerly rampant assault of white Zetsu clones. The only effect it had on humans was a mild rash where it had touched, and true to Naruto's guess, the girl began to lightly scratch her stomach. She glared at him and he smothered his large grin, turning away from her and peering down at Zetsu. The plant creature was fading, 4 needles sunk fully into his torso and right arm, leaking their poisonous contents into the creature's body. Some creaking sounds snapped from inside the creature as its nature chakra hardened, groaning and unable to speak. Naruto shrugged dramatically. She was bait. He bore a chilling grin down at Zetsu, watching as its body began to gradually turn gray. It was a pain worse than death and a future worse than torture, as being made into a statue didn't automatically guarantee death. People turned to statues didn't die, and the same was for Zetsu. The boy genially patted Aoki-chan's shoulder, walking back to Madara. "Do whatever you want." Behind his back, he heard a distinct crack as the samurai stepped on Zetsu's head, smashing it to pieces. "And as for you," Naruto said, the happiest grin on his face and his eyes curved up as he stood over the Uchiha. The man only had the strength to bare his teeth and the boy eased himself down on his knees beside the man. "You're not allowed to die yet." A week later, Naruto walked into the Alliance headquarters and threw Madara's head into the meeting hall. It rolled on the table, the other cage watching it as it stopped before the Hokage. It was eyeless and nightmarishly devoid of a lower jaw. The hair was low and the skull looked like it had been broken open at the scalp, neatly glued back together afterwards. Naruto hid it well. Standing at the doorway in a dark green coat that was unzipped at the front to show his black shirt and pants, and ninja sandals, having his right arm wrapped in a plaster cast underneath his coat, held to his body by a sling and leaving the sleeve empty. His blonde hair was cut a bit shorter and there was a slight wince in his larger-than-life grin. His eyes though conveyed a mix of enjoyment and malice. The boy smilingly looked around at the gathering, accepting the nods of respect from the Kage, the Mizukage, and the new Tsuchikage, before his red eyes stopped at the festering Hokage, glowering at Madara's severed head, its hollow eye sockets staring at her. He spoke his next words to her. "Don't bother me again." He gave her a winning smile, and a 2-fingered salute, and left the meeting hall. Epilogue. 24 years later. 6:10 a.m. Akai countryside. Kiri. It was another early morning at the Uzumaki household. The smells of breakfast permeated the house, rice pudding, and pancakes with bean paste filling, with a brew of coffee boiling on the coffee maker and a kettle of water, for tea, bubbling gently on the stove. In the serenely located countryside, the Uzumaki home didn't stand out much from their distant neighbors. A one-story home made from red bricks and concrete painted a dusky shade of orange and had dark blue roof tiles. A barn a stone's throw from the main house was painted similarly, albeit far older and in constant need of maintenance. A short, waist-height fence surrounded the large property, marked by warnings for visitors against wild animals that prowled the property. A lush, trimmed field of grass made up the entirety of the grounds within the property, and the same could be said for the fields for miles around outside of the land, some of which were populated by farms and animals grazing sheep. A gravel road passed the front of the property, leading further into the countryside and also into main Kiri. A cobbled path from the gate led to the cream-colored front door. It was a simple home, having a living room, dining room, and kitchen with a store, 3 bedrooms upstairs and a single bathroom. The windows were thrown open, allowing pleasant streams of light to bask the sleepy home in warmth. Aoki slowly ambled up the stairs, her left hand holding the stair rail and her right hand on her hip, supporting her back as the slight bump of her belly threw off her center of gravity. She was in a dark gray shirt and black loose-fitting shorts, and her feet were nestled in a comfortable pair of slippers. Tied over her torso was a red apron with white writing that said in block letters, "Kiss the cook." She got to the top of the stairs and steadily walked to the first door on the left. On the door hung a sign with a name written on it. "Enter if you dare." She knocked her fist on the door and turned the doorknob without delay, pushing inside and sighing in exasperation at the total darkness inside the room. "Nezu, I know you're awake," she called into the room, standing at the doorway with both of her hands on her hips and a slight shake of her head. She squinted into the room, her eyes jumping up to the ceiling and curiously saying, "Nezuko?" 2 pairs of red, vulpine eyes flicked open from the ceiling and a slow, toothy grin grew on the person's face, visible enough to darken the imagery. She lunged at Aoki and the woman casually caught the girl by her face, halting any sort of ambush with a weary exhale. Even as the girl futilely thrashed her arms and legs, the 8 spider appendages at her back clicking and twitching to tag her mother. "Do we have to do this every day?" The woman waited until her daughter had stopped struggling, swinging her hands to scratch her mother, and weathered the pointless onslaught until the girl slumped into Aoki's hand, looking up at her mother through the woman's fingers with 4 irritated red eyes. Nezu was a 10-year-old girl, a messy yellow hair, shortened to a curved bob with a fringe falling to her upper eyelids. The girl had a healthy flush to her skin, something she certainly didn't get from her pasty father. She was still in her pajamas, barefoot and clearly just woken up from sleep. Aoki smirked and shoved her daughter back, telling her, "Get dressed." Before she entered her daughter's room, she made a general gesture with her finger, flicking it up and down her daughter and pointing at her 4 eyes and her spider limbs. "And get rid of those. You know the rules." The girl grunted, a simmering glare following her mother as she carefully padded into her room, tossing open the windows. Aoki distractedly picked up Nezu's books and notes littered haphazardly on the ground, neatly arranging them on the girl's desk. She paused a moment to admire the girl's trophies, seated on a shelf: 2 first-place trophies for outstanding performance in a math competition, first place in a spelling bee, 3 cheap plaques for best attendance for a student, 3 first place and a single second place trophies for a regional and continental chess tournament, and finally, there was a scrappy trophy made from a toilet roll and a tennis ball. Her younger brother made that for her. "Good morning to you too, Mom," Nezu said in a sarcastic chipper tone. She closed her eyes and the eyes at her temple shut, the eyelids smoothed together till they disappeared as the 8 appendages sprouting from her back pulled back into her body. Nezu slowly strolled into the room and snatched a wrinkled shirt from her mother, stubbornly shaking her head when her mother insisted on taking it to the laundry, pointing for her mother to leave her room. "Fine." Aoki shook her head and made to walk out, but stopped, turning to the red-eyed girl and asking, "Where'd your father go?" The girl frowned and walked to her bed, fumbling with the sheets and dressing her bed. "He went hunting." "Nezu," Aoki said firmly, and the girl sealed her lips, giving her back to her mother. She flinched when Aoki called her again, using her full name. "Nezuko." He's in the lab, said he wanted to work off some stress, she reluctantly supplied, spying a look over her shoulder. She saw the anguished expression on her mother's face and the girl's jaw tightened, standing upright and turning around to Aoki, keeping her hands tucked behind her. Her voice dipped to its normal tone, somber and calculating. Did both of you fight again? Aoki feigned a smile, doing her best to look nonchalant. We didn't fight. It was just a small disagreement. The girl's pointed stare didn't relax, narrowing somewhat as her vulpine pupils became thinner. Was it about me and Ichiro? Again? The woman waved away her daughter's piercing stare, chuckling, "You're too smart for your age, Nezu." She left the room, calling after her, "Get dressed and tell your father that breakfast's ready. The bus will be here soon." The girl's lips screwed into a contemplative frown. Alone in her room and tilting her eyes to the ground, she answered, "Yeah. Sure, Mom." Nezu stepped down the stairs wearing her clothes for the day. She had on jean overall shorts that reached her mid-tight, and a dark, long-sleeved shirt underneath with matching leggings and plain white Converse. The girl lugged a rainbow-colored backpack on her back, one strap slung over her shoulder and gripped in her right hand. The girl also wore a camouflage green baseball cap with words neatly and visibly sewn at the front. "Daddy's little abomination." At the last step, she hopped off with both feet, landing with an absent-minded flourish. She faced the dining room and caught sight of her mother busying herself by arranging 3 plates at the table, fidgeting with Ichiro's high chair, until she looked up and saw her daughter slide into the dining room. At the displeased flicker of her mother's lips and the lower of her eyebrows, Nezu knew exactly what her mother was going to say. "Must you wear that? It sends the wrong message," she said, talking about Nezu's cap. "Dad made this for me," Nezu replied, tilting her chin up in defiance and standing her ground. "I think it's tasteful." "It's not," the woman said immediately. "Take it off." "No," Nezu fired back. "Nezuko," I said, "take it off." "No." Aoki glared and her eyes hardened. "You're too young to start rebelling against your mother. Take it off." I said, "No." Nezu's face screwed up in irritation and her mother's scowl deepened, reddening her face until the woman's hands jumped to her temple, rubbing her fingers deeply over her brow and tiredly slumping onto a dining chair. Nezu's face flickered with regret, backtracking half a step and closing her hands into fists. "Mom, please, go and look for your father," Aoki mumbled, her face hidden behind her hands. "Mom, Nezuko," Aoki interrupted her daughter, not looking at the remorse marring the normally controlled girl's expression. "Please, go." The girl gnashed her teeth and swallowed. She stood upright, toughening her chin and squaring her shoulders. She carelessly tossed her backpack into the living room on her way to the front door and marched off to find her father. Nezu closed the front door after herself and stood there, closing her eyes and exhaling a tight breath as she slumped against the door. She stayed like that, tucking her hands into her overall pockets and frustrated with herself, letting her head cool down as the warm rays of the sunrise poured over her. A minute later, she pushed off the door and walked to the barn with clipped steps, treading the soft grass and crossing the field to the large, wooden building on the western corner of the property. The large doors were wide open and she saw some fluorescent lights beaming on from inside. Inside was her father's laboratory. The floor was tiled white and yellow checkered patterns, polished till they shone and ebbing a mildly sterilized, lemony scent. The instruments were primarily made from stainless steel, arranged accordingly inside a glass case on the far-off right side of the barn, along with a few empty beakers, test tubes and syringes. On 3 sides of the barn, the left, back, and right sides, was a long white counter with a marble countertop, devoid of even the tiniest speck of dust, split into 3 sections for the 3 sides but connected at an angle. At the center of the barn was an operating table, which had a human-shaped depression from sometime recent. An air conditioner purred somewhere in the background, obscured by the lights of the fluorescent lights. At the back of the barn, Nezu found her father, and a whisper of a smile lifted her face. He was in a white lab coat and black sweatpants, hunched over a microscope and animatedly scribbling into the notebook with his left hand. His unruly short blonde hair was spiked carelessly with streaks of gray running on the right side of his head. Carefully carried himself from the microscope a few steps to the left and picked out a few items from a cabinet: a Bunsen burner, a beaker, a bottle of water and some 10 other chemicals stored inside thick, plastic containers. The man took a few trips back and forth from his microscope, transporting the items there before he returned to observing whatever it was he was looking at through the microscope. Nezu noted her father had a sizable hunch at his back, taking care not to move too much or jostle too hard with his manner of tingling excitement. She came over to him and his ears perked up, twisting around with a large smile, eyes closed, and the laughter lines of his face became genially more pronounced. "Morning, morning, Dad," she greeted him, the corners of her eyes turning up, and the man teasingly ruffled her hair, chuckling silently when she threw his hand away. He went back to what he was doing, flicking on the burner and setting on a beaker filled with water, setting the flame to low. Before she could ask what he was up to, her father placed a finger on his lips, pointing his thumb over his shoulder and into the back of his lab coat, at the lump on his back. The hunch softly inhaled and exhaled. "Ichiro?" Nezu said in a low voice, joining her father at the counter and looking up at him with knit eyebrows. "Yeah," he said with a gentle nod. "He had a nightmare," he added with a laughing smirk. "Little leech bit my neck and nearly stopped my heart. His venom's getting potent." The girl scoffed and her father laughed, doing so quietly. The girl hopped onto the counter on her father's left side, on the other side from the burner, leaning her head down to look into his notes. She couldn't understand a single word or decipher any of the chemical compounds her father drew. Her red eyes swirling with confusion, her father tousled her hair again, though this time she didn't lean away. Relative silence slipped between them, not nearly uncomfortable. As hard as Aoki tried, and Nezuko's mother tried, her daughter and her son stumbled after their father, relying on him more. They had far more in common. It was difficult finding anything she could relate with her more, and she saw how alone it made her mother feel in their home, as much as her father put into bringing her into the fold. "How's your mother?" Naruto suddenly asked, jolting the girl out of her thoughts. She idly swung her feet and the man glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. She didn't look at him, and the man smiled sadly. "That bad?" Nezu pursed her lips and bobbed her head. Naruto stood back from his microscope, taking account of his son sleeping underneath his lab coat on his back. "What was it about this time?" Nezu turned to her father with a narrowed stare and the man frowned, looking at the burner as the water inside the beaker bubbled. The girl pressed harder, snapping her fingers in front of his face. "What was the fight about?" Naruto winced. It wasn't a fight, more like a disagreement. The girl resisted the urge to roll her eyes again, recalling that her mother described the events of earlier in the night as a disagreement as well. "Looking back now, I don't even know." Nezu's face didn't change at her father's flippant answer, rapidly watching him as he continued. "Something about wanting you to enroll on the school's track team, or kendo, or the football team. Maybe it was something about chess club being a waste. I like chess," Nezu bit, and her father smiled at her kindly. "And I don't like sweating, gym is already pushing it. Football is basically pointless sweating. All of the annoying girls are in the swimming club. The track kids are hyperactive losers. The chess club is quiet. I like quiet." I know, her father nodded understandably to her rant. The girl had spoken at length about how much she hated sweating, wasteful movements, and the bickering kids in her class, and Naruto animatedly bobbed his head to her complaints, saying, "But your mom just wants you to reach your full potential. She also wants you to hang around kids your age. You know, make some friends." The girl screwed her mouth shut, glaring away from him. The chess club was perfect, in her opinion, because she was the only member. Half of the time, she was playing a match by herself, and the rest of the time she was sleeping with the club door locked shut. That was the pinnacle of paradise. Nezuko didn't look at him when he turned off the burner, poking her shoulder jokingly and half smiling. "Can you just try it? For me?" The girl scoffed, and her father's grin broadened sharply, playfully prodding her cheek and singing. "Come on, Nezu." The girl pouted, turning her red eyes to her annoying father and gnashing her serrated teeth. "Track." The man raised his hands in grateful surrender. "That's all I'm asking. I'm not leaving chess club," she stated. "Perish the thought. And," she said, pushing for a concession on his part, "I want you to come and cheer for me in the math tournament." The man snorted, saying with a gleaming, proud smirk on his face, "Nezu, come on, have I ever missed any of your competitions?" He didn't return to his observations and tests, judiciously pushing away his instruments. He closed his notebook with his pencil inside and took out the glass slide he was observing, keeping it in his notebook. "It's almost time for school." Have you had breakfast? Mom sent me to call you. His eyelids fell and a large sweat drop formed at the side of his head at his daughter's purposeful forgetfulness. He made to help her down from the counter, but she said something that made him freeze. You and Mom used to be happier before we were born. The man's hands curled back at Nezu's abrupt statement, caught flat-footed. The girl's jaw hardened and she said, looking over her father's shoulder at nothing in particular, I've seen the photo albums. It's obvious. Stop. A dark frown crossed her father's face and Nezu's mouth shut. Your mother and I have different ways of doing things, and yes, these disagreements revolve around you and your brother, Naruto said frankly, not bothering to filter his words to his daughter. She was too smart to be spoken down to, but he made sure to say his next words carefully and clearly, but that doesn't mean both of you are the cause for any of this. I and your mother love you and your brother so much. More than she or I could ever possibly express. He said that with so much sincerity. Nezu looked at him, seeing the resolute look in her father's vulpine stare. Then why won't you two marry? Naruto's answer was immediate. We agreed that we aren't marrying people. Everyone in class is calling me weird because you and Mom aren't married. Naruto's grin leapt up and his eyes sparkled. Your life is none of their business, Nezuko. Let them talk, that's all they can ever do. Aoki and Naruto had two different parenting styles, and this was mainly where they clashed heads. Aoki wanted to raise their children traditionally, the way her adopted father raised her and her brothers, Mifune and Nifune, keeping their childhood intact. Naruto wanted to be as open and as honest as a parent could be while keeping their childhood intact. The man's rebellious spirit and his thirst for knowledge rubbed off on his children, and the worst possible thing to do to two little people that wanted to hide something from them, the same way Naruto's childhood had been, before his godmother reached out to him. Not knowing made Nezuko and Ichiro feel weak, and feeling weak for them was similar to backing them into a corner with no way of escape. They would kick and scratch till they got the truth. So, Naruto gave them the truth, as much as necessary, and Aoki didn't like this. It wasn't advisable parenting, but Naruto wasn't an ordinary parent. If they're talking behind your back about you, and calling you a weirdo, which is very true, he chuckled and ate a few punches to the shoulder from his irritated daughter, then let them talk. It just means you're famous. Nezu scoffed, a smile growing on her face. I guess so. Naruto gave her a bright smile and helped her down the counter, saying, don't get a big head. Too late, she snorted. Naruto tumbled into a shivering laugh. Ack, he cringed with pain, hands reaching for his back at the half-awake lump sinking his venomous teeth into his father's back. Ichiro, no biting, stop, ow. Aoki-chan met her partner at the front door, waiting there and meeting Naruto's apologetic look with a remorseful one. Nezu skirted around her father and her pregnant mother, trotting to the dining room and digging into breakfast. She wasn't in the mood to interfere with her parents making up. The woman half smiled and tilted her head to the side, and Naruto scratched the back of his head, chuckling. I'm sorry I exploded on you, she said, and the man exhaled, shaking his head and pulling her close, taking account of the bulge of her stomach. I'm sorry I exploded, he reciprocated, pursing his lips and furrowing his brow, dipping his head a bit and looking at her with sincere red eyes. I've been stressed about Ichiro starting nursery school and Nezu needing glasses, and the whole debacle with the Hokage. I know, Aoki reassured her partner, rubbing his sides slowly. Me too. She closed her eyes and accepted a reconciliatory peck on the lips, smiling into the kiss and leaning away teasingly when Naruto came in closer. Nezuko had inherited her father's naturally enhanced senses, and this included a quality of vision that nearly blinded her on a day-to-day basis. To remedy this, Naruto made an eye drop to help lower the intensity of Nezuko's vision to something a regular person would see, until he was able to make a pair of glasses or contact lenses. Ichiro didn't show any sign of this painfully amplified vision. Aoki flicked her eyes further into the house, where Nezu pointedly ignored her parents. Aoki turned back to her partner. I know it's 10 years too late, but we need to figure out a system. I have an idea. Do tell. The woman gnawed on her bottom lip, recognizing a former argument by saying, I agree, that I might not be acknowledging the kids and how perceptive they are. Naruto dramatically leaned away, placing a hand over his heart and saying with raised eyebrows, oh really? The woman harmlessly slapped his chest and the man chuckled, kissing her again. Leaning away, Aoki said, Ichiro is barely 2 and he started forming complete sentences, and Nezu's won all of those awards. She distractedly played with the front of her partner's lab coat, smoothing it and saying, "We could maybe include their opinions." Sometimes. And only Nezu, for the time being. Naruto smothered his smirk as if he hadn't previously suggested this some weeks ago. Excellent idea. The woman glared at him, a smile playing on her lips. You've won nothing, by the way. Mom, where's my lunch? It's not in the kitchen, Nezu interrupted them, calling from the kitchen. It's in the living room, she answered, and the girl fast walked past her parents and entered the living room, looking around until her eyes brightened up on finding her lunchbox on the couch facing the television. The two parents idly watched their daughter as she picked up her backpack and lunchbox, trotting back to the dining room and returning to her breakfast. The girl rolled her eyes, an expression she greatly enjoyed doing, and ignored them. Naruto found a smile playing at his lips when the girl purposely changed seats, turning her back to them and eating spoonful after spoonful of sweet rice pudding. You don't think civilian school is a waste, right? He suddenly asked. The woman whipped her head around and looked up at him, mockingly bewildered. Is that doubt I hear? The man smirked. Is the world's smartest man having doubts? Aoki looked around her partner, staring up at the sky and gawking. Is the sky falling? All right. Naruto waved away the giggling woman's teasing. Nezu enrolling in Kiri's civilian academy was one of the few decisions both parents agreed on. They had asked the girl when she turned 6 and she had said she didn't enjoy the physical exertion of being a ninja. So the two parents gladly contacted the civilian school in Hidden Mist, paid the tuition, bought her whatever books she needed and arranged for one of the school buses to drive through the countryside. That is, on the condition that their daughter was going to be an active participant in self-defense training with her father. The two parents didn't care that their daughter wasn't going to be a ninja or a samurai, but they were adamant that she learn how to defend herself when the need arises. Nezu was excelling in school, which was a gross understatement. Her mother had been tempted to accelerate her schooling by having Nezu jump 1 or 2 years, but Naruto had talked her down, insisting that the girl wait till she was 12 before she starts jumping classes. The man exhaled from his nose, not knowing that he had been staring at his daughter, eyes creased with worry. It was an expression that would have made younger Naruto retch. Aoki half smiled, touching his chin and turning his head back to her. As you said, she said gently, Nezu and Ichiro are far more capable than either of us give them credit. A slow smile lifted on Naruto's face and the woman snorted, correcting herself, then I can give them credit, smartass. Their children were genetically coded with information to survive. They got that from their father and the side effect of the experiments he performed on himself in his youth. Nezu and Ichiro were 40% spider, and Naruto didn't once feel regret for that. Where's Ichiro? Naruto jerked his head to his back, at his hunch, and Aoki stifled a laugh, something that made the man inoffensively scowl. It's not funny. His venom is a lot stronger than when he started teething. I keep telling you to get him a chew toy, something to keep his teeth out of your back. And I keep telling you that my son isn't a dog that needs a chew toy. The man sniffed, grateful as Aoki gently eased him out of his lab coat, smiling coyly at the man's stubbornness. It was the same with Nezu when she was younger, as the girl didn't have control of her venom, so she essentially exhaled everything when she bit her father's back. I'm having Sagi prepare something more durable. It should be ready any moment now. Now out of his lab coat, Aoki's eyes fell on her son and her expression softened. Ichiro was a pale, 20-month-old child with scruffy black hair and 2 whisker marks on his cheeks. His 4 eyes were closed and he was breathing calmly, teeth latched into his father's back and nails digging into Naruto's sides, clinging on for dear life in his spider silk onesie. The boy grumbled and shivered, no longer covered by Naruto's lab coat. He pushed closer to his father's warmth and groused, turning his head to the right and peeking 2 of his 4 pupilless black eyes, sleepily mumbling something on seeing his mother. The woman slowly, carefully, took the boy off his father's back and Ichiro immediately embraced his mother, not so much as nipping her skin with his teeth or nails. Even Nezuko, when she was younger, didn't dare bite her mother. The boy clung to his mother and drifted back to sleep in her arms as she gently swayed. Speaking of almost dying, Aoki whispered breathily and Naruto's eyebrows lowered, looking at her with a stony, serious face. Nezuko attacked me this morning. Mom, Nezuko cried from inside, stumbling off her chair and falling on the ground in her rush, scrambling to her parents. "Dad, she's lying." The man's eyes jumped and he frantically checked his partner's body, his heart visibly clamoring with panic. "Did she get you? She's 100 years too young to tag me." The woman smirked. The frantic girl hopped up and down behind her father, shaking him for his attention. Naruto wilted with heavy relief, sagging for a brief moment before he reared around and glowered at his daughter, who shrunk back. "Nezuko, I swear, Dad, I didn't attack her," she stammered shakily, widening her vulpine eyes piteously and trembling her lips. She crossed her fingers over her heart and swore, "Honest." She looked around her fuming father, whose stoic face hardened, and found her mother's smug stare. "Mom, tell him I was just playing, please." That was when the bus rolled by and screeched to a stop at the gate. The driver honked the horn, jolting the twitchy girl. "When you get home, we're going to talk about why it's a bad idea to attack your mother." He spoke with a hard grit of his sharp teeth and the girl cringed away. He pointed into the house. "Get your stuff and go to the bus." The girl sulked back inside, her shoulders hung low and her head drooping. Naruto then decided to add, "And bring your phone." "But, Dad." "Now, Nezuko." The bus driver honked the horn again and the handful of children in the bus bustled to the windows, watching Nezuko's father as he collected his daughter's phone and swiped his fingers across the screen, bypassing the security, evident from the horrified gape of their daughter and her blubbering protests. "No internet for a week," Naruto said with finality, and the girl groaned. "But Dad, do I hear a month?" The man dared her and the girl wilted, flopping her head back dramatically and collecting her phone with both hands. "I thought so. Now, come here." Sulking harder and lower than she had ever sulked before, Nezuko came in for a hug, squeezing her father tightly and pushing her face into his stomach as he reciprocated, patting her back. "Have a great day, kid." The man beamed toothily and his daughter harmlessly punched his stomach, pushing away from him and hiking up her backpack as she trekked to the bus, gripping her lunchbox handle in a tight fist. Her father called to her, "Nezu." The girl theatrically slumped her shoulders and turned around, returning to her parents and stopping before her mother. Standing on her toes, she kissed her mother's cheek. Nezuko softly touched her brother's back and received a murmured goodbye in return from the slumbering child. "You can take that hat to school, but just this once, okay?" Aoki told her daughter, and the girl grumbled, accepting a kiss on the brow from her mother. "What about your eye drops?" "In my pocket," she grumbled. "Call us if anything happens." Aoki kissed her daughter's brow again, exuding love and forcing a defeated sigh from the girl. Nezuko's father stood strong as the girl leveled him with a pitiful pout and a tear-glazed look, slowly turning around and moping her way to the bus. Wisely so, the other students stayed the hell away from her as she sat at the back of the bus. When the bus was far enough, and the parents were out of the enhanced hearing of their daughter, Naruto broke, nearly weeping as Aoki patted his back. There, she consoled him. "Monster." He narrowed his eyes at his partner and the woman snorted, leaning up and pressing her lips against his. "Now she hates me." "She doesn't hate you," Aoki said, comforting the overdramatic man with one hand and propping her 1.5-year-old to her chest with the other. The boy, still droopy with sleep, subconsciously reached out to his father with his left hand, patting Naruto's arm in wordless consolation, facing his face away and with his eyes still shut. "See? Even Ichi thinks you did good." The boy grumbled incoherently and shifted, wiggling for a moment in Aoki's chest before settling back again, exhaling a relieved breath and gripping his mother's shirt with both hands. Lowering her voice, the mother cooed, telling her partner, "I'll bathe him. We can have breakfast and watch TV before we drop him off at the nursery. They won't mind if we're late." Here, Naruto's red, vulpine eyes welled up and he pursed his lips, on the brink of tears. Aoki pointed a warning finger at him, her own eyes tearing up and barely able to contain the flood of emotion ready to pour out of her. "You promised you weren't going to cry. If you cry, I cry." The man covered his glazed eyes with the crook of his right elbow, sniffing. "Why do our kids have to grow up so fast?" "I blame you," the former Ronin said, walking into the house. "Me?" The man gasped incredulously, jogging after his partner. "I've got quality swimmers. Can you blame me?" "Kami, Naruto, that's disgusting." Naruto tumbled into a hearty laugh, clutching his stomach and kicking the front door shut after himself. Aoki peered down to her chest, meeting Ichiro's dark, four-eyed gaze, and the mother and son pair rolled their eyes in unison. And that concludes the final part of this story. Thank you for spending your time here at Ichiraku Ramen and listening all the way to the end. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows the shinobi world to continue through new adventures and alternate timelines. If you enjoyed Ink Heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Once again, full credit goes to Foy the Snooze Button, the original writer of this story. If you would like to read the original version, you can find the link to the story in the description below. Let me know in the comments what story you would like to hear next. Until the next time, stay safe, and I'll see you again at Ichiraku Ramen.